The case of Matthew Winkler, Secrets of a Religious Family. Sometimes the most horrible and unpredictable crimes are committed in seemingly perfect families. Of course, even in the most prosperous unit of society can come crisis, which will be unnoticed by others, but literally poison the lives of all members of the family and eventually lead to tragedy. The Winklers, in the town of Selmer, were considered by many to be a model family. The young pastor, his wife, and their 3 daughters looked happy, had everything they needed for a comfortable life, were healthy and successful, but in a quiet pool, as they say. In this case, many questions remained unanswered because we heard only one version of what happened. And the story itself became the subject of the book, Sex and Murder: Secrets of a Pastor. March 22, 2006, the small town of Selmer, Tennessee, shook the terrible news. A 31-year-old pastor named Matthew Winkler was brutally murdered in his own home, and his wife Mary and their 3 daughters, 8-year-old Patricia, 6-year-old Maria Eliza, and 1-year-old Brianna, disappeared without a trace. That day, the preacher of the Church of Christ did not show up for the evening service where he was supposed to attend with his family. This circumstance seemed strange and suspicious, because Matthew was always very responsible and could not miss the planned event without informing anyone. None of the family members also answered the phone, which was even more disturbing. Alarmed community members decided to go to the Winklers' residence to find out what had happened and if they needed help. From the outside, the house looked normal. The windows and doors were intact, and nothing suspicious was visible. Inside, there were lights on in several rooms, and they could hear a television playing quite loudly in one of the rooms. It gave the impression that the owners of the house were busy doing their own thing. The front door was locked, but no one answered the knock. Phone calls also went unanswered, and through the curtained windows, it was impossible to see what was going on inside or if anyone was there. However, even though the whole situation was quite strange, no one was in a hurry to call the police. Instead, a call was made to an elder of the religious community, who advised them to look for a spare key and open the door themselves. It took another hour and a half, and when members of the community were finally able to get inside the house, they found an eerie scene. Everything in the house was in its place. There was no sign of intruders, but the owners were nowhere to be seen either. Everything seemed normal until the visitors looked into the marital bedroom. There on the floor, in a pool of his own blood, lay the pastor's body. There was a huge hole in his back from a gunshot wound. Blood spattered everywhere, and bloody foam dried on his face. By then, the body had already cooled and stiffened. It was obvious that Matthew had been lying there for many hours and had probably been killed in the morning because he was dressed in his pajamas. It was only after this that a call was made to the police. By the time the police arrived, a whole crowd of neighbors, churchgoers, and casual passers-by had gathered in and around the house, interested in what was going on. All of these people had left their fingerprints at the crime scene. They left their fingerprints and shoe prints, erased or trampled possible evidence, greatly complicating the work of investigators. The police took the body for forensic examination and found that the pastor was killed by a single shot in the back, fired from a large caliber weapon. He died a few minutes after the wound, from massive blood loss, unable to call for help. It was simply impossible to establish definitively whether there were any strangers in the house at that time, because the people who had arrived before the police arrived had literally destroyed all traces of them. The picture of the crime was quite strange, and those who could shed any light on what happened disappeared. The fate of the wife and daughters of the murdered man remained unknown. The police assumed that the woman and children could have been kidnapped or also killed. By the way, the family minivan Winklers also disappeared from the garage. A massive search was launched and the state issued a yellow alert. This meant that children were missing and all citizens were asked to be vigilant and assist in the search. But let's break this whole story down from the beginning. Matthew Brian Winkler was born in 1974, November 21st, in the picturesque country town of Henderson, Tennessee, and was the youngest of 3 sons of Dan and Diane Winkler. Our hero and his 2 older brothers, James and Daniel, grew up in a rather conservative Christian family. Their parents were very religious, and brought up their sons in strictness and obedience. It is worth noting that Matthew became a minister of the church in the 5th generation. His father, great-uncle Michael, grandfather Wendell, great-grandfather Merlin Winkler, and great-great-grandfather Merlin Paul Winkler Sr. were all preachers of the gospel at one time. The father, to top it all off, ran the local preachers' school and was a man respected and influential in his hometown. In their younger years, the Winkler brothers attended Sunday school and were active in church activities. In addition, Matthew in high school was seriously interested in soccer, and everyone who saw his game on the field noted that he had talent, and he could well become an outstanding athlete of world renown. However, later the young man decided to sacrifice a promising sports career in favor of Bible study and church ministry. Since the preaching activity of the head of the family was associated with frequent travel, his wife and children almost always followed him. Because of this, Matthew changed several schools in his childhood, but the active, communicative, and friendly child quickly made friends and gained authority everywhere. When the boy finished school, his family lived in a small city called Austin, located in the state of Texas. Matthew was a creative person, had a powerful charisma, but here are some outstanding achievements in studies could not boast. After graduating from high school, he entered the college Fried Hardeman and successfully completed it. In parallel, the young man began to try his hand as a pastor, under the careful guidance of his father. Matthew was the youth minister of the Central Church of Christ in the city of McMinnville. He was later appointed to the preaching position at the 4th Street Church of Christ in Selmer, Tennessee. Mary Carol Winkler, maiden name Freeman, was born in December 1973 in Geist Township, Tennessee, and was the oldest of 2 daughters to her parents. She was also raised in a deeply religious family, with strict rules. The head of the family for many years served as a pastor in the Christian church, where the girl attended Sunday school. A few years later, a second daughter was born to the family and named Patricia. Unfortunately, the girl was born prematurely and had a number of serious health problems, including cerebral palsy, encephalitis, epilepsy, and mental retardation. For many years, the parents did not want to put up with the disappointing diagnoses of the child and desperately tried to treat her, agreeing even to experimental therapy. However, it did not bring any particular improvement. Mary tenderly loved her little sister, always treated her with awe and cared for her as best she could. But in 1987, when 10-year-old Patricia was bathing in the bathtub, her older sister was only a minute away to take something from the bathing accessories, and at that very moment, the girl had another epileptic seizure. When Mary returned to the room, her sister was no longer breathing, and all attempts to resuscitate her had come to nothing. For a 13-year-old girl, it was a huge shock and the first loss in her life. She blamed herself for the tragedy and was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Teachers who saw the deplorable state of Mary sent her to the school psychologist, working with whom she helped. But her father, learning about what was happening, made a scandal and forbade his daughter to go to these sessions, saying that such problems are discussed only within the family. In fact, the girl never received real moral support from her parents. Mary grew up modest and quite shy. She tried to avoid any conflicts, and after the tragic death of her little sister, she became withdrawn. Since her father did not allow her to seek help from a specialist, the trauma over the years has resulted in serious psychological problems. After the death of Patricia, the parents decided to adopt a little girl named Charlotte, who was from a dysfunctional large family. Soon the couple was also allowed to take custody of Charlotte's 2 brothers and sister, so the family was reunited in their new home. Mary was once again the older sister and took care of the younger children while helping her mother. Matthew and Mary Winkler, family life. The future spouses met soon after Matthew graduated from high school. The guy was prominent, handsome, athletic, and enjoyed great popularity with the opposite sex. But to spin novels right and left, he did not allow a strict religious upbringing. The young people immediately developed a liking for each other, which quickly grew into love. For both of them, it was the first strong feeling in their lives, and after a couple of months they met each other's parents, and having received their blessing, began to plan a wedding. In April 1994, the lovers got married. When the family had an older daughter, Patricia, the head of the family was still in college, and was forced to leave school for a while. He took a job at a construction site, but long there did not last, because he was not used to hard physical labor. During this period, for the first time, made himself aware of the difficult character of Matthew. He was often angry with others, irritated at small things, and sometimes he could not control his anger. But Mary tried not to complain, and not to tell anyone about what was happening in her family. A meek young woman, brought up in the spirit of patriarchy, obeyed her husband in everything. At first, the Winklers lived near the house of Mary's parents, so she was able to see them regularly. But soon Mrs. Freeman was diagnosed with cancer, which rapidly progressed, and in just a few months she literally burned from the disease. It was another shock for Mary, and the care of her underage siblings now fell on her shoulders. The situation was further complicated by the fact that Mary was pregnant again at that time. But soon after the birth of their second daughter, the family moved to another city, where they bought their own small house. After the move, Mary was completely absorbed in the care of the baby, and almost stopped communicating with her father, as well as with younger brothers and sisters, who were too demanding and constantly needed attention. In addition, the young mother began to suffer from severe postpartum depression. Everyone who was closely acquainted with the family Winkler noted some oddities in the character and behavior of Mary. The young woman was characterized as an introvert and even sociophobic. She did not communicate with anyone. It was difficult for her to make new acquaintances, much less friendships. She suffered from mood swings, was prone to melancholy, and any little thing could bring her to tears. While Matthew was building his career as a pastor, his wife became increasingly withdrawn. The situation became even more complicated when Mary once again became pregnant, and a few months later, she learned that the fetus had died in her womb. Such news strongly shook Mary, who was looking forward to the appearance of this child, and very much dreamed of a large, friendly family. Again, to see the long-awaited 2 stripes on the pregnancy test she could only 2 years later, and her happiness was unbounded. This time, Mary hid her pregnancy for a long time, as if afraid of something. She did so until her situation became obvious. Once again, everyone began to talk about Mary's strange behavior and pathological reticence. The strange behavior of Mrs. Winkler was associated not only with a severe psychological trauma she suffered in childhood, but also with a very unhealthy environment within her own family, which only undermined her already unstable nervous system. The head of the family was a man of authority and demanded unconditional obedience. Despite the fact that in public the Winklers looked like an ideal married couple, where there was trust, mutual respect, and harmony, in reality, their neighbors have repeatedly heard how the husband shouted and snapped at his wife for no apparent reason. No one could even imagine that a respected pastor could raise a hand on his wife until one day Mary had a huge black eye. Despite the fact that she denied the fact of domestic violence and said that it was an accident, the city quickly spread rumors about the cruelty of a young preacher who beats the mother of his children. In addition, Matthew at some point developed an irresistible urge to experiment in bed. He offered his wife to diversify their intimate life with role-playing games, adult toys, and so on. But for Mary, brought up in strictness, with conservative views, such was unacceptable. She strongly restricted her husband in this, which infuriated him, and he repeatedly tried to get what he wanted by force. One day, after another abuse in bed, Mary called her only close friend in tears and complained to her about the situation. The friend, who promised to keep her secret, immediately blabbed about everything, which provoked a new wave of rumors and gossip about the unacceptable behavior of the clergyman. At that time, Matthew was up for promotion and aspired to be a local church leader, but he was rejected because of rapidly spreading unpleasant rumors about him. Moreover, he was also removed from his position in the Sunday school, where he had brought God's word to the children and was in good standing. This was requested by the parents, who had also heard about the pastor's peculiar predilections. All this forced the family to leave their residence and move to another city where they planned to start over. They settled in Selmer, where they quickly gained the love and respect of those around them. Matthew took a job as a church pastor again, and his wife found a part-time job to make a small contribution to the family income. And although the family was still not smooth, their neighbors, as well as the congregation of the church where Matthew preached, considered Mary and Matthew an ideal couple, and their family a model. Next door to the Winkler family lived a young married couple, with whom the couple quickly became friends. They often visited each other, celebrated holidays together, shared news and secrets. A few months before the tragedy, during a joint dinner at the pastor's house, Mary bragged to the neighbors that her husband had bought her a gun for self-defense, and had already taken her to the shooting range several times to learn how to handle it confidently. Mary turned out to be quite a capable student, quickly mastered all the subtleties, and accurately shot at targets. Moreover, it turned out that the Winklers already had firearms in the house, which had been purchased by the pastor earlier, also for self-defense. The guests wondered why the pastor and his wife needed all this, because they live in a quiet town where they have no enemies, and everyone around them loves and respects their family. After another move of the couple, their financial situation left much to be desired. Mary was in search of various part-time jobs, and she also decided to get a medical degree to then get a job in a clinic and help sick children. Soon, Mary decided to improve the financial condition of their family through financial fraud. She herself later claimed that she did not realize that she was doing something illegal and was going to pay back all the money as soon as she got back on her feet. What Mary was doing is commonly referred to as artificially inflating account balances. Mrs. Winkler also received checks from unspecified sources and then deposited them into a bank account she and her husband owned. She then changed the address of the account so that all communications would be routed there. The total amount of checks she received was almost $17,000, which aroused certain suspicions of the bank employees, who decided to invite the couple to the office branch to clarify the circumstances and resolve the situation. But the pastor and his wife never showed up at the bank, and this aroused even more suspicion. It was assumed that Matthew was not aware of what his wife was doing at all. However, after Matthew's death, his wife tried to prove in court that the whole story of fraud was his idea, and that it was he who forced her to make dubious transactions, while he himself remained in the shadows, without arousing suspicion. Where has Mary disappeared to? When Mr. Winkler was found murdered in his own home, his wife and daughters were put on the wanted list, fearing that they too might be in mortal danger. Initially, the meek, shy, and homely Mary was initially viewed solely as a possible victim of the crime. However, after talking to neighbors and receiving information from the bank about financial fraud, she became the main suspect in the murder of her own husband. It was necessary to find out as soon as possible where Mary had disappeared to, where the children were, and if they were all right. They, as well as their family car, were put on the wanted list. Attempts were also made to trace transactions made from Mary's bank card and to locate her location through her cell phone signal. Mary was found just a day later in an Alabama resort town where she and her children were having fun at a local amusement park. It was as if the mother wanted to give her children one last party, realizing that she would soon be going to prison and would see her girls very soon. When the family was taken to the police station to testify, the two older daughters confidently told the same story. According to them, intruders broke into the house and injured their dad, and their mom picked up a gun to protect them. They were then forced to run for their lives. According to the girls, their father was alive and in the hospital, and they were soon to go and see him and return home. What exactly happened in the house, as it turned out, Patricia and Maria Eliza did not see, and learned about the events from the words of their mother. They only heard a gunshot and glimpsed their father lying on the floor, and then their mother put them in the car, and they drove away. Mary almost immediately began to confess, but she claimed that she could not reconstruct the entire chain of events of that day, referring to the temporary blur. According to her, her spouse had abused her for years, humiliating her and inducing her to forms of intimacy that were unacceptable to her. Mary insisted that it was he who had initiated the financial scam she had perpetrated. Matthew demanded total obedience, easily lost his temper, and once gave the will of his fists. This was confirmed by Matthew's secretary at his previous place of employment. The woman repeatedly witnessed how the pastor insulted his wife, who carefully brought him lunch to church, but he was always dissatisfied with something. The evening before the tragedy, there was another scandal in the family, because of which the spouses went to bed in separate rooms. Mary cried all night, and in the morning she did not realize how in her hands was a shotgun, which her husband kept loaded. She entered Matthew's room and shot him in the back while he was still lying in bed. Matthew collapsed to the floor, bloody foam oozing from his mouth and nose. According to Mary, her husband, while still alive, whispered, "Why?" To which she replied, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." Mary then took her daughters and left the house, and her husband, as experts have established, tried to reach for the phone to call for help, but he no longer had the strength to do so. By the way, the weapon of crime was found in the trunk of the car on which Mary left with the children. For what purpose she took it with her, Mrs. Winkler also could not answer. At the trial, the role-playing costumes found in their home were presented as evidence of the pastor's humiliation and moral abuse of his wife. Upon seeing them, Mary turned pale and then became hysterical. Despite the fact that she confused her testimony and told several different versions of what happened, the court agreed that she was the victim of a domestic tyrant, and the murder was the result of years of anger, resentment, and pain. However, this did not absolve Mary of responsibility for what she had done. In April 2007, the court delivered its final verdict in this complicated and confusing case. Mrs. Winkler was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter, but her mental state raised many questions. It was originally expected that the young woman would be sent to prison for at least 6 years, but in the end, she was given a sentence of less than 1 year. She spent 2 months of that sentence in a psychiatric hospital, where experts were trying to determine whether she could regain custody of her children upon release. In the summer of 2008, Mary was given sole custody of her daughters, who all this time lived with their paternal grandparents. Matthew's parents were extremely upset by this circumstance. They believed that their daughter-in-law had deliberately killed their son and suffered virtually no punishment for it, and now their granddaughters were given full custody of her. However, all their numerous attempts to file appeals had failed. As for the fraud case, it never went to trial. The bank never filed formal charges, and the whole story was dropped. Today, we will visit Dallas, a modern city with a cosmopolitan spirit and Southern charm. It is widely known for its skyscrapers, upscale shopping, restaurants, and rich cultural life. There are many historic districts, such as the West End with its late 19th century buildings and futuristic landmarks, shimmering glass towers and skyscraper spires that serve as the city's main landmarks. Dallas is a city where modern metropolitan life is infused with natural beauty. There are more than 30 parks in different parts of the city. The Gable Park residential complex is located at the epicenter of Dallas chic. Living here itself offers a vibrant, exclusive lifestyle and exquisite, unique experiences. The high-rise building is elegant in appearance, has a parking garage and concierge. It is a vibrant and luxurious apartment building with a landscaped saltwater pool, fitness studio, and gourmet coffee bar in uptown Dallas. It's a quiet and safe place with no crowds of tourists or neighborhood residents strolling by. On September 2, 2015, at 07:42 p.m., a car entered the Gable Park parking lot. The car parked, and a beautiful young woman got out. She had a shopping bag in her hands. She slammed the door shut, stepped away from the car, and a minute later, 2 gunshots rang out. With the business completed, the dark figure quickly jumped into a black Jeep Cherokee that pulled up and fled the apartment complex. Local resident Hashem Saad, who was walking to the parking lot to pick up his car, saw the injured woman and called the emergency services. Officers arrived at the scene of the tragedy and found the injured woman. Unfortunately, she was already dead. The victim turned out to be 35-year-old Kendra Hatcher. Kendra K. Hatcher was born February 3, 1980 to Reagan Hatcher and Bonnie Gibson Jameson Colley in Springfield, Sangamon County, Illinois. Her parents divorced and her mother married Bruce Jamieson. She was not an only child. She had 3 sisters, Jamie Kaufman, Ashley Lipscomb, Melissa Jameson, and 1 brother, Neil Hatcher. She grew up in Pleasant Plains and studied dentistry there. After her divorce in 2010, she moved to Dallas where she began working at Smilezona Dental Studio. Kendra had a strong Christian faith and wanted to use her dental skills to help others. For example, the clinic provided services to disadvantaged children completely free of charge. In her spare time, Kendra taught Bible studies and participated in volunteer programs that included building churches overseas and providing free dental services to children in Ecuador. Dallas was welcoming to the young professional. Kendra's professional life quickly gained momentum and her personal life flourished as well. On May 24, 2015, Kendra began dating Dr. Ricardo Paniagua. Kendra and Ricardo met through a dating app, and from their first date, they were inseparable. They both had similar values, interests, and wanted the same things in life. Ricardo was finishing his residency in dermatology at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center, and even though they had only been in a relationship for a few months, the young men were already discussing their upcoming marriage. However, an incident in a parking lot took the life of his beloved woman and cut short all future plans. Investigators who arrived at the scene of the massacre examined the crime scene and put forward the version of robbery, as Kendra's purse and some valuables were missing. Bullet fragments and a gun magazine were found on the ground next to her body. However, the manner of shooting and the traces of the gunshot pushed the robbery version to the background. One bullet struck the woman in the back and the other in the head. The entry wound from the bullet was at the top of the head and it exited through the chin, indicating that Kendra had her hands up and behind her head when she was shot. The murder theory was confirmed when it was possible to obtain CCTV footage and reconstruct a picture of what happened. As a result, by the age of 13, he was struggling academically and had a fragile psyche. Once, unable to bear such a life, Steinke attempted to hang himself, but was fortunately stopped in time. Afterward, doctors diagnosed him with depression and hyperactivity. Bullied at school, he decided to stop attending. Over time, Jeremy fancied himself immortal and began frequenting websites of similar themes. His online profile was filled with topics like pain, self-harm, blood, and razor blades. No one knew about the couple's forbidden relationship except their friends, who found their love, to say the least, peculiar. Their communication would have remained a secret had the Richardsons not started monitoring their daughter's excessive internet use. Deborah and Mark discovered Jasmine was corresponding with strangers, alarming them as any parent would. Therefore, they decided to remove the computer from the girl's reach. Moreover, they were shocked to learn she had fallen for an adult man with dubious interests. His very nickname, Soul Eater, spoke volumes. Thus, Jasmine and Jeremy's relationship became forbidden. To help their daughter break free from this destructive relationship, Deborah and Mark sought a psychologist's help. They sincerely believed that counseling would benefit their parent-child relationship. To their delight, it did. Jasmine showed compliance and seemed to be returning to a normal life. Promising that it was all in the past, she got her computer back. This became the Richardsons' last fateful decision, leading to their demise. Saturday, April 22, 2006. Preparing for bed, Mrs. Richardson heard a noise in the basement. "Rats again," she thought. Descending, she turned on the light and saw a person in a ski mask. He stood opposite her, looking at her. Startled, she screamed. The stranger rushed at her, covering her mouth. His efforts were in vain. Deborah struggled and screamed louder. He stepped back, drew a knife and stabbed her in the chest, then again and again. Hearing his wife's screams, Mark rushed down, grabbing the first thing he could find, a screwdriver. He had been fixing an outlet that day and by sheer chance left the tool out. Entering the basement, he was met with a horrific scene, his wife lying in a pool of blood and someone standing next to her. Mark immediately attacked the intruder but received a stab wound to the stomach, followed by more stabs. As the searing pain subsided and his eyes began to close, Mr. Richardson quietly asked, "Why?" "Because your daughter wished it," the attacker replied. Upstairs, Tyler was the only one left. The boy sat on his bed in his pajamas, too frightened to move. The approaching footsteps grew louder, and the bedroom door opened. A few days before the murder, Jasmine was overjoyed. Her parents believed in her remorse, meaning they could now communicate again. Mobile phones were just becoming popular at that time, so the computer remained the only means of communication. As soon as Miss Richardson regained internet access, she immediately wrote to Jeremy. "It all starts with them disappearing and ends with us staying together," she told him. During the days when the young lady was visiting the psychologist, a terrible plan had formed in her head. It solidified over several days of punishment. Surprisingly, Steinke found it enticing, but added that everything needed to be done creatively and with attention to detail. The couple understood that they could not be together as long as the Richardsons were alive. Later, Jasmine's friends recalled how often she spoke about her parents, particularly how much they annoyed her. Therefore, she wanted to end their lives. However, no one took Jasmine's words seriously. Saturday, April 22nd, 2006. Garrett headed across the street to his friend Tyler's house. The boy wanted to play. The weather was nice outside, despite being chilly. Such was the spring that year. When Garrett approached the house, he noticed the blinds were still closed. No one answered his knock on the door. Strange, he thought. The Richardsons should be home. Their car is parked in the driveway. On June 25, 2001, and charged with first-degree murder. After spending 6 months in custody, she was released on bail. The first trial soon commenced. The prosecution's main theory was the motive for the homicide. Hoping to see someone, the child curiously peeked into the living room window but saw no one. Then, Garrett decided to walk around to the back of the basement, where he often played with Tyler. Peeking through the window, he saw something strange on the floor. It appeared to be 2 silhouettes in a pool of blood, the boy informed his mother. Skeptical, she decided to check on the family across the street. They approached the house together. Garrett pointed to the window he had looked through earlier. The woman looked in and recoiled in horror. She immediately called emergency services. Something happened at the Richardsons. They seemed to be lying in the basement floor, all in blood, the neighbor reported. The police arrived promptly. Breaking down the front door, they descended to where Garrett and his mother had seen something. Entering the dark basement, the officers had difficulty recognizing the people lying on the ground. Their bodies were mutilated and bloodied. But there was no doubt. It was Mark and Deborah Richardson, and they were deceased. Blood was everywhere, on the floor, walls, even the ceiling. A bloody mess, no other way to describe what was before them. Later, the police searched the house. In the upstairs children's room, they found a small child. The boy lay in bed among toys, splattered with blood with visible knife wounds. The child's throat had been deeply cut. Medicine Hat had never seen such horror. One officer said, "It will take me decades to forget what I saw today." After the house was searched, the police realized one family member was missing. The Richardsons' eldest daughter was gone. Officers worried she might be in danger. Everything indicated the attack occurred in the basement and the child's room. The rest of the house was undisturbed, and at first glance, nothing was missing. The state of the bodies suggested the crime occurred the previous night. Apparently, the perpetrator broke into the house and attacked the boy and his parents. Then what happened to Jasmine? And where was she? The police began to construct theories about what had happened. Perhaps by some stroke of luck, the girl was somewhere outside the home, safe. Or the perpetrator had abducted her and was now harming her. Or maybe a ransom demand from relatives would come with time. However, as time passed, there were no clear answers. Soon, detectives turned to the media, requesting help in the search for the missing girl. They hoped Jasmine would make contact, or someone would provide valuable information. Meanwhile, the investigation into the crime continued. Investigators interviewed relatives, friends, and colleagues about all aspects of the slain family's life. Did they have any adversaries or enemies capable of such a heinous act? However, the more the investigation progressed, the clearer it became. There was no reason to wish death upon anyone in the Richardson family. They were truly wonderful people, faithful spouses and loving parents, except for the eldest daughter. Officers learned that the girl had been causing quite a bit of trouble lately. Therefore, the tone of media announcements changed. This time, the investigation wanted to locate a person of interest. It was entirely possible that the girl knew details about the crime, or she might have been involved in it. Considering the suspect's age, the media could no longer publish her real name, as per Canadian law. Thus, news agencies began to refer to Jasmine Richardson as JR. After it became known about her relationship with Jeremy Steinke, the couple was declared wanted. Initially, the search for the young lovers began among their friends and acquaintances, thinking they might be hiding out with them. However, this lead proved to be a dead end for the police, but they did uncover something intriguing. A few hours after the crime, the young couple was spotted at a restaurant and at a party hosted by an acquaintance. Someone from their circle of friends mentioned that Jasmine appeared unchanged. There was no indication she had been abducted or was in a state of shock. She was drinking and having fun. When friends asked how they managed to escape from her parents, Jasmine laughed. "Jeremy and I just took care of them." "Yes," the boy agreed. "I carved them up like fish." The party guests laughed, thinking it a grim joke, unaware that the statement was true. The involvement in the crime was also confirmed by a comic found in Jasmine's school locker, where she detailed how she would deal with each of her family members, with her boyfriend as her accomplice. Photos of the suspects were distributed widely. It was only a matter of time before a citizen would step forward with information about their whereabouts. Soon enough, information came in. The couple was spotted in the community of Leader, Saskatchewan, approximately 130 kilometers from Medicine Hat. Caught off guard, Jasmine Richardson and Jeremy Steinke were found sleeping peacefully in a pickup truck. Without resistance, they were taken to the police station. Naturally, the couple was interrogated separately, starting with Jasmine. She shared that she was deeply in love with Steinke, and he reciprocated her feelings. However, the difference in age and social status was a barrier between them. According to Jasmine, the Richardsons would never have accepted their relationship. Therefore, Jeremy committed the ultimate act of love. He ended her parents' lives, providing them the chance to be together. When detectives asked if Jasmine was involved in the crime, she said, "I wasn't home when the crimes occurred. I didn't know about what had happened. After I found out, I accepted it. I loved Jeremy very much, so I ran away with him." Detectives needed to determine who was the main instigator. Since breaking the suspects proved difficult, the investigation used a cunning strategy. They placed an informant in the cell with Jeremy, who skillfully extracted details that contradicted Jasmine's statements. Jeremy confessed to the informant that the plan to end her parents' lives was Jasmine's idea. Initially, he was not supportive, but agreed after they discovered the forbidden love and took away her computer. "I took care of Deborah and Mark Richardson, and Jasmine took care of her younger brother herself. She literally begged me to leave Tyler for her, though I was glad to settle scores with all of them," Jeremy cruelly revealed. After this confession, investigators confronted Miss Richardson with the recording. She had no choice but to confess to everything, admitting she stabbed her younger brother out of mercy, not wanting to leave him an orphan. Later, the couple shared their social media profiles and passwords with the investigation, which began to examine their correspondence. They had sent each other thousands of messages, confirming Jeremy's statements. Jasmine indeed conceived the plan on her own. Steinke wrote that Jasmine was the only person who supported and approved of his tastes, replacing the society he felt alienated from. Fearing he would lose her, he helped realize the dreadful idea. "I want to slit their throats. They will regret what they have done, especially when I make sure they're gone. They'll pay for the insults. Finally, there will be silence. Their blood will be the payment." Jeremy supported his beloved. His friends also reported that just a few hours before the attack, they watched the 1994 film Natural Born Killers, which portrays a couple committing 9 heinous murders. This story inspired their friend, who said he wanted to enact a similar plan with his girlfriend. "I think it's the best love story of all time," Steinke said. With sufficient evidence at hand, the suspects were charged with 3 counts of homicide. The detectives pieced together the confessions of the accused, witness testimonies, and other case evidence to form a clear picture of the crime. Before the act, Jeremy was intoxicated. Jasmine led him into the house and guided him to the basement, where he attacked her mother. Deborah was the first to die, suffering 12 stab wounds across her body. The deepest wound pierced her chest, reaching 12 centimeters deep and striking her heart. In a rage, Jeremy mercilessly continued his assault on Mark, who sustained 24 wounds, 9 of which were in the back. Like his wife, the family patriarch bled out on the basement floor. Tyler Richardson was the last to die. While Steinke was dealing with the parents downstairs, Jasmine inflicted 5 stab wounds on her younger brother upstairs. After Jeremy finished, he went upstairs to help his girlfriend with the child, coldly slashing the boy's throat as if carving a pumpkin. Afterward, Jeremy went home to wash off the blood, while Jasmine caught a taxi to a restaurant where the couple had agreed to meet. After discussing the night's events, they headed to a party. A friend of Jeremy's, Casey Lancaster, helped them dispose of the evidence and reach Saskatchewan. Words fail to describe the horror they created. And using them to poison her husband, Gregory de Villers, staging a suicide scene in their apartment, scattering his body with red rose petals. Case of Christian and Newsom. A new judge scheduled hearings for all 5 individuals involved in the student's tragic end. The couple embarked on their murderous spree with such ease and nonchalance as if driven by some otherworldly force. It is shocking that during interrogations and their time in custody, not a word of regret or remorse was uttered for their actions. While detained, they wrote letters to each other, calling themselves legends and immortals. In one letter, Steinke proposed to Richardson, who joyfully accepted. Then, unexpectedly, their mad love began to fade like last year's snow. During the trial, they shifted the blame onto each other. In June 2007, Jasmine Richardson was the first to stand trial. She pleaded not guilty, claiming to have been in a zombie-like state and unable to act while Jeremy was killing her family. She also claimed she only wounded her younger brother, and it was Steinke who delivered the fatal blow. Jasmine insisted that their discussions about ending her parents' lives were purely hypothetical, but they appealed to Jeremy so much that he compelled her to turn them into reality. Under 3 counts of homicide, Miss Richardson was sentenced to just 10 years in prison, thanks to the nuances of Canadian juvenile criminal justice law, which states that individuals under 14 cannot be sentenced to more than 10 years of imprisonment. The sentence was aimed more at rehabilitating and restoring the girl's psyche than punishing her. In 2008, Jeremy Steinke's trial commenced. He insisted he had no initial intention of ending the lives of his girlfriend's parents. However, once discovered in the basement, he felt compelled to attack. He claimed he did not harm Tyler, suggesting Jasmine was responsible while he merely watched from the doorway. The defense argued that Jasmine had intentionally seduced him, wishing for him to free her from her parents' strict control. Some friends testified that Jeremy had sought their help with the act, driven by his fear of losing Jasmine to the extent of being willing to do anything. The lawyers also requested the charges be reduced to manslaughter, arguing Steinke was under the influence of substances at the time of the act. Steinke's inconsistencies emerged when, asked by the prosecution why he committed the act, he replied, "When you find your other half, you do whatever it takes for them." Throughout the trial, he remained indifferent to the proceedings, but broke down when Jacqueline May, his mother, testified in his defense. She admitted to bearing significant guilt for his upbringing, as he was often attacked by her partners, subjected to beatings and rejection. Steinke was found guilty on 3 counts of first-degree homicide, receiving 3 life sentences. He would be eligible for parole no earlier than 25 years later, in 2033. Charges of complicity in the act against Casey Lancaster were dropped. In Medicine Hat Court, she was found guilty of obstruction of justice, sentenced to a year of house arrest, and prohibited from consuming drugs and alcohol. While in custody, Jeremy Steinke changed his name to Jackson May. Jasmine Richardson's 10-year sentence included 4 years in a psychiatric facility, where she was diagnosed with conduct disorder and oppositional defiant disorder, indicative of a refusal to follow rules and socially unacceptable behavior, typically more associated with children than adults. This underscored her psychological immaturity and instability during her relationship with Steinke. In her final years under conditional community supervision and attending special programs, medical professionals reported her genuine remorse. After serving her full sentence, she was released in 2016. Currently, Jasmine Richardson lives in Canada under an assumed name, her true identity still protected from media disclosure. Her return sparked significant public debate, with some arguing she deserved a second chance, while others believed she warranted a harsher penalty. Nonetheless, the residents of Medicine Hat would prefer not to have Miss Richardson as their neighbor again, given the brutality of her crime. Whether Jasmine has truly changed after spending her formative years in detention remains to be seen. Time will tell. Silently conceal. Sadly, the dead cannot speak. Jennifer's life was cut short in her prime. Regrettably, she realized too late an essential truth. Staying away from certain individuals and ceasing communication with them could mean saving oneself. The case of Anna Walsh, a horrific event in the basement of a family home. For over a year now, an investigation has been ongoing into the mysterious disappearance of a young woman and mother of 3 children, Anna Walsh. In January of the previous year, the case was reclassified as a brutal crime, although the body of the missing 39-year-old American woman of Serbian descent has yet to be found to this day. Her husband, Brian Walsh, who had previously encountered legal issues for fraud, was arrested on charges related to her disappearance. No one could have imagined that this individual could be responsible for ending the life of the mother of his sons. It's noteworthy that the Walsh family appeared to be quite prosperous, successful, and happy on the surface. Moreover, the couple was not in want, living in a luxurious home, and could afford anything they desired. However, few were aware of what happened behind the closed doors of this large and beautiful house. Even the person closest to Anna, her mother, did not realize the deadly danger her daughter was in. Interestingly, Brian managed to woo Anna away from her previous husband years ago in a rather unique manner. So unique, in fact, that the woman and her first husband even sought police protection from harassment and threats. Nevertheless, she eventually left with Walsh, to whom she was married for over 7 years. But what happened that led the family head to decide to rid himself of his wife? And what did he do to her? Who was Anna Walsh? Anna Lubicic, who later became known as Anna O'Neill following her first marriage, was born on April 18, 1983, in the Serbian capital of Belgrade. Here, she spent her formative years, growing up with her younger sister in a cultured family. Her academic journey led her to the 5th Belgrade Gymnasium, where she excelled as one of its standout students. Pursuing higher education, Anna attended the esteemed Belgrade Research University, the most historic and expansive university in Serbia. Her academic pursuits included a deep dive into foreign languages, culminating in a master's degree in French language and literature. At 22, with her diploma in hand, Anna sought broader horizons and career prospects in the United States, a move fully supported by her family. In 2005, she embarked on her American dream. Settling in the U.S., Anna aimed to further her education in hospitality management. She took on administrative roles at prestigious hotels, notably the Inn at Little Washington in Virginia, a part of the elite Relais and Chateau hotel circle. Anna's warmth, approachability, and sense of duty saw her swiftly ascend the professional ladder, garnering respect from her peers and supervisors alike. Multilingual and adept at resolving conflict, her innate charm and charisma allowed her to form connections with ease. Beloved by colleagues and blessed with a burgeoning circle of friends, Anna seized every chance to shine. She became a U.S. citizen, retaining her Serbian nationality, enjoyed a high income, and invested in her own property and car. Her travels broadened her horizons further, and her career flourished, leading to a promotion to senior manager. Anna's intelligence, beauty, slender frame, and radiant smile attracted many admirers. During her tenure at the Wheatley Hotel in Lenox, Massachusetts, she found love with Marcus O'Neill, the establishment's head chef. Their romance led to marriage in 2009, and Anna adopted her husband's last name. Who is Brian Walsh? Brian Paul Walsh was born in July 1975 in Boston, Massachusetts, into a well-known, affluent, and respected family. His father, Thomas Walsh, was a distinguished neurologist who worked at one of the state's leading hospitals, where he headed a department, and also taught at a prestigious medical university. From a young age, Brian was the quintessential spoiled child, luxuriating in wealth and never knowing the word no. He attended one of the best private schools, wore expensive branded clothing, and lived a life of ease. Despite his parents' efforts to provide him with the best education, after finishing school, he failed to stay enrolled in any of the 3 prestigious colleges his father had arranged for him to attend. Nevertheless, Brian was far from foolish. His peers remembered him as cunning, calculating, and quite aggressive. He always found a way to get what he wanted one way or another. Brian was known for his extraordinary, even obsessive desire for money and a luxurious lifestyle, and he was extremely reluctant to part with his funds. In his youth, he often borrowed money from friends, only to never return it. During his college years, he would invite friends to the most luxurious restaurants, then, through various schemes and manipulations, ensure that others always paid his share of the bill. For many years, Brian was estranged from his father, up until the elder Walsh's death in 2018. The rift in their relationship began after the ungrateful son fraudulently withdrew nearly $1 million from Dr. Thomas Walsh's personal account and simply disappeared with the money. The father did not report his son to the police and even tried to persuade him to return the money voluntarily. When Brian refused, Thomas ceased all communication with him. By the time of this egregious theft incident, Brian's parents had long been divorced, and his father had another family and decided to permanently erase his eldest heir from his life and his will. However, when Thomas passed away, Brian immediately made his presence known and even filed a lawsuit, claiming that the will left behind was forged by the doctor's widow and younger children to cheat him out of his rightful inheritance. Naturally, he was unable to prove anything or receive any part of the estate. Moreover, those who knew Brian described him as greedy, malevolent, and quite cruel, with a tendency towards violence and an inability to control his emotions. He achieved everything by force, and during bouts of anger, became dangerous. According to some reports, in the late 2000s, Walsh underwent treatment in a psychiatric clinic where he attempted to curb his bursts of rage, and it was then that he was officially diagnosed with sociopathy. A truly peculiar love story. The future spouses met in 2014, a time when Anna was working as a senior reservation manager at the Wheatley Hotel in Massachusetts. At that moment, she was married to Marcus O'Neill, who was employed there as well. Brian was among the hotel's guests, and he was immediately taken by the attractive young woman. The fact that Anna was already married did not deter Walsh in the slightest. He began to show her attention that grew increasingly insistent. Accustomed to getting his way from a young age, and not one to accept refusal, he began to pursue Anna relentlessly. He managed to obtain her phone number and even her home address, where she lived with her husband, turning their lives into an absolute nightmare. In 2015, the O'Neills found themselves compelled to ask the police for protection against Brian's incessant harassment, which persisted day and night. He constantly sought out Anna, called her at work, sent messages to her personal phone, and demanded she divorce her husband to be with him. The situation escalated when Walsh threatened to harm Anna and her husband if she did not leave with him. What happened next remains unclear, including why Anna eventually changed her mind. However, a year after seeking police protection from Walsh, she unexpectedly divorced her husband. Moreover, a few months later, Brian became her second officially wedded husband. The newlyweds settled in a luxurious home in Cohasset, Massachusetts, located about 20 miles southeast of Boston, in an upscale and well-appointed neighborhood. In this marriage, they welcomed 3 sons in quick succession. The boys were born a couple of years apart, and at the time of their mother's disappearance, they were 6, 4, and 2 years old. Anna did not consider taking maternity leave and successfully juggled work with motherhood, continuing her upward career trajectory. She assumed the position of regional general manager at Tishman Speyer, a real estate company, where she earned a high salary and effectively became the primary breadwinner for the family. As her job frequently took her to Washington, D.C., she also purchased another home there, registered in her name, where she stayed during business trips. During these times, she relied on visiting nannies to help care for her children. The fraud case against Brian Walsh. What was the head of this large family doing while his wife was both expanding their family and building her career? Brian was unemployed. The $1 million he had once taken from his father was dwindling, and everything his wife acquired was wisely registered in her name. Brian was actively seeking effortless income sources. Before marrying Anna, Brian had spent some time in South Korea, where he befriended a very wealthy individual whose family owned an impressive art collection. Upon returning to the United States, Walsh maintained this connection, and his friend unexpectedly asked for his help in selling several paintings by the iconic artist Andy Warhol. Brian eagerly agreed, but decided not just to sell the artworks for a commission, but to truly profit from the transaction. He had access to a series of abstract paintings by the great artist, collectively titled Shadows. He appraised each painting, obtained the necessary documentation, including authenticity certificates, and then decided to create copies of both the images and the accompanying documents. Walsh approached artists who made precise replicas of the paintings. He convinced the artists that he needed these copies as a backup, since each of the original works was worth about $250,000. For several years, the fraudster successfully copied and sold fake paintings as originals to collectors from various countries, until one of his buyers, an art expert specializing in Andy Warhol's work, quickly identified a forgery and sued the fraudster. The FBI took on the investigation, and in April 2021, the suspect pleaded guilty to selling counterfeit art. He was placed under house arrest after his lawyer negotiated a deal, requiring him to return the proceeds from the sale of the paintings to the buyers to avoid actual prison time. Brian's movements were significantly restricted, but he was allowed to leave his house. Twice a day, he could drive his children to and from their educational institutions. Additionally, he had 2.5 hours in the morning to visit stores, pharmacies, dry cleaners, and a few other places in his area to purchase necessities. The list of these places was limited and approved in an official document. The mysterious disappearance of Mrs. Walsh. On December 31, 2022, the Walsh family was preparing to ring in the new year together in the comfort of their home. Present were just the spouses and their 3 sons. Due to their young ages, the boys went to bed early, leaving Anna and Brian at the dinner table. That day, Anna made her last post on social media, extending her greetings and noting ambiguously that the year had been challenging. But she and her husband remained united. Anna was scheduled to fly to Washington, D.C. for work on January 3rd, but on January 4th, her employer, Tishman Speyer, reported her missing to the police. She had failed to show up for work, missed closing a crucial deal, and her phone had been unreachable for several days. Independently of Speyer's actions, her husband also reported her missing. expressing his concern that he had been unable to contact her for several days. According to Brian, he last saw Anna on January 1st. He claimed she woke him up early in the morning, saying that there were some issues at work, and her boss had requested her to come in earlier than planned. After that, Mr. Walsh believed his wife headed to the airport with just a few belongings. However, inconsistencies in the case soon emerged. Firstly, Anna hadn't purchased, changed, or reserved a flight ticket for January 1st, nor had she canceled her flight scheduled for January 3rd. Secondly, she didn't appear at the airport on either January 1st or 3rd. Thirdly, how did she leave the house? Her personal car was still in the garage, and she hadn't called for a taxi. Brian suggested she might have hitchhiked, but this theory sounded far from convincing. Brian's statements and behavior raised many questions. His accounts were inconsistent, and he didn't seem particularly troubled by the unfolding events. Unable to contact the mother of his children for more than 3 days, he only reported her missing on the 4th day and only after her workplace called. Investigation and arrest of the suspect. From the outset, Mr. Walsh was considered a primary suspect, yet law enforcement lacked sufficient grounds for his arrest or a warrant to search their family home. They conducted only a cursory inspection with the homeowner's permission, which yielded nothing. Brian claimed he had been living a normal life during those 3 days, visiting usual stores and tending to household chores. However, verifying his claims proved difficult. Whenever he left the house, he forgot his phone, which, according to him, was often taken without permission by his older children to play games. On January 5th, the police made a public appeal through television, displaying a photo of Anna and requesting anyone with information about her whereabouts or fate to immediately contact law enforcement. Yet, no witnesses came forward. The last time Anna was known to have made calls was to her mother and sister on December 31st, making her husband the last known person to have seen her. Surveillance camera footage from the neighborhood provided no leads. Anna was not captured on any cameras on the morning of January 1st, as if she had never left her home. On the contrary, her husband was recorded leaving and returning several times, but it was impossible to determine his destinations. Walsh's claim of a supermarket visit was debunked. His vehicle wasn't seen on any footage en route, nor was he spotted in the store. It wasn't until January 8th that Brian was arrested for providing false statements and taken in for questioning at the station, while his home was finally searched. It was discovered that on January 1st, he had gone to a hardware store in a different area, not on the list of approved locations he could visit under house arrest conditions. There, he spent nearly $500 on a significant quantity of cleaning supplies, plastic sheeting, duct tape, a mop with a bucket, and utility rags. He paid in cash, presumably hoping his visit would go unnoticed. Horrifying discoveries in the family home. During the search, at first glance, nothing out of the ordinary or suspicious was found in the home. Everything was in its place, with no signs of struggle or bloodstains detected. However, when law enforcement descended into the basement, there was no longer any doubt. This was the scene of a gruesome crime. There, smeared bloodstains were visible everywhere, and among the old clutter, a bloodied knife and saw wrapped in towels were hidden. Previously, Walsh had admitted that on January 3rd he visited his mother's home, located on the other side of town. He claimed he had violated his house arrest conditions because his mother needed help with household tasks due to her deteriorating health. But after the grim discoveries in the basement, police suspected that on his way, the man could have disposed of evidence or parts of his deceased wife's body. All the trash bins in the area where the spouses lived, as well as along the route to his mother's house, were inspected. These searches yielded results, and in one of them, a kitchen hatchet with traces of dried blood and several blood-stained towels, similar to those found in the Walsh's basement, were discovered. Forensic analysis confirmed that the blood in the basement, on the towels, knife, hatchet, and saw belonged to the missing Anna, dispelling any remaining doubts about her demise. Search history reveals chilling intent. Police seized a laptop belonging to Mr. Walsh, as well as a tablet owned by the couple's eldest son from the Walsh residence. The search history on these devices left investigators in disbelief. Weeks before his wife's disappearance, Brian was actively searching online for information about the most favorable states for divorce in terms of property division. He also sought information on whether he could lay claim to the second home in Washington, D.C., owned by Anna and registered solely in her name, thereby uncovering a possible motive for the crime. Regarding the tablet, the first query made around 4 in the morning on January 1st was, how long does it take for a body to start decomposing? This was followed by nearly 24 searches on how to dispose of a body, how to clean up blood traces, how to dismember a body, whether a body could be identified if the teeth were removed, how long DNA traces last, and whether a person could be charged with a crime if the body was never found. All this information was searched on his young child's tablet, the child of the woman he mercilessly dealt with. By January 3rd, Brian was already searching, how and when can someone inherit the property of a person who has disappeared? Clearly, he was confident he would evade punishment and was preparing to claim the inheritance. Charges and trial. On January 18th, Brian was formally charged with the murder of his wife, despite the fact that her body or any remains had not been found. Prosecutors believed that on the night of January 1st, Brian intentionally or accidentally took his wife's life and then decided to dispose of her body by dismembering it in the basement of their home. He then packaged the body parts in plastic and over the following days discarded them in trash bins across different parts of the city. The area around the Walsh residence, as well as within a couple of kilometers, was thoroughly examined for evidence. Nearby wastelands, wooded areas, and bodies of water were also searched, but these efforts yielded no results. The defendant himself pleaded not guilty and refused to disclose what he had done with the body. Additionally, it was revealed that Anna had been feeling unhappy lately and had even considered divorcing her husband. She mentioned this several times during phone conversations with her mother and sister. The day before she disappeared, she called her mother, asking her to fly from Serbia for a few days. However, her mother apparently did not take her daughter's words seriously and decided to postpone her visit. The trial of Brian Walsh is ongoing. The accused is currently being held at the Norfolk Correctional Facility, awaiting his next court date. Anna's mother has been following the investigation from her home, as she has not traveled to the United States. The Serbian Ministry of Foreign Affairs has contacted the consulate in New York, which in turn has been in touch with the Norfolk District Attorney's Office to ensure that Anna's mother is timely informed about the investigation and hearings. As for the Walsh's 3 sons, they are now under state custody. None of Brian's family members wish to take care of them, citing Anna's mother's age and poor health, and her sister, who currently lives in Canada, also declined to take in her nephews. Only Anna's close friend, Pamela Barden, has expressed willingness to take the boys in, preferring that over them being separated and placed in different foster homes. The case of Mohammed Shamji, a brilliant surgeon, father of many, and ruthless criminal victims of domestic violence sometimes not only endure abuse, humiliation, and beatings, but also blame themselves for what's happening. Each of these cases, when brought to the public's attention, is condemned, causing confusion and leading to many questions. Why does the victim allow themselves to be treated this way? Why don't they tell anyone? Why don't they leave their abuser? Contrary to popular belief that physical violence occurs primarily in dysfunctional families, statistics show that such incidents don't depend on the social status of spouses, their position in society, or their job titles. Mohammed Shamji and Ilana Frick Shamji were not only outstanding doctors, but also true luminaries of science. Mohammed made a name for himself in neurosurgery and the treatment of spine injuries and diseases. while his wife was an equally renowned family doctor with a PhD. For years, they both saved other people's lives, yet few knew what was happening in their private lives. This story shocked the entire world, and the accused admitted his guilt only to spare his 12-year-old daughter, who had accidentally witnessed her mother's death, from having to testify in court. Notably, shortly before the tragedy, Ilana had posted a photo of her husband in a kimono on social media, taken during one of his jiu-jitsu training sessions, with a joking comment that this doctor could not only heal, but also break a neck. This post turned out to be prophetic. Ilana Frick. Life before meeting Mohammed. Ilana Christina Frick was born in September 1977 in the Canadian city of Windsor, located in Ontario in the southern part of the country. She was the younger of two daughters in the family of George and Anna Frick, who emigrated from Croatia to North America in the early 1970s. Elena was raised alongside her older sister Caroline, with whom she was very close from an early age. The birth of Ilana was seen as a miracle by her parents, as Anna had serious complications after her first pregnancy, and doctors had said she would never conceive again. Ilana's parents worked at a large car factory, striving to provide their daughters with everything they needed and to give them a good education. Both sisters were smart and did well in school, but Ilana stood out for her determination and passion for learning. She spent nearly all her free time reading books, and she also managed to attend a dance studio, practice gymnastics, and compete in track and field. During middle school, Ilana chose to work during summer breaks to help her family. She worked in cornfields, and even then tried to manage her budget wisely. Elena excelled in math and other sciences, and by high school, she had decided to pursue a career in medicine and become a doctor. She graduated from high school as the top student and enrolled in a prestigious medical university without issue. Around this time, she also began a romantic relationship with a man named Matthew Ryan, whom she had known since high school and who was now studying in the same department. Their student romance lasted until graduation, but afterward, Frick decided to go to Ottawa and continue her studies in the capital's university residency program. Her boyfriend settled for a job at a local hospital and didn't consider furthering his studies. Elena's and Matthew's relationship continued long distance and lasted until nearly 2002. They even planned to marry, but eventually decided to remain friends. By then, Elena was interning at one of the country's top clinics and aimed to earn a doctorate, while Matthew hadn't advanced in his career. Love at first sight. In February 2003, during a night shift at the hospital, Ilana went to the staff room and saw a new colleague who immediately caught her attention. The young man, Mohammed Shamji, was just a year older than Ilana and was doing his residency in the neurosurgery department. Mohammed came from a family of prominent doctors. He was born and raised in Ottawa in a family of the renowned surgeon Farid Shamji and his talented psychiatrist wife, Edith. Mohammed's older brother, Ali, was an experienced medical biophysicist. Both brothers graduated from Yale University, and Mohammed later returned to Canada to earn his doctorate from Western Ontario's Research University. Mohammed was also interested in the blonde, but initially, he made no effort to approach her. Ilana, however, fell for this tall, dark-skinned man at first sight and tried to attract his attention. Soon, Mohammed asked his colleagues for her number and sent her a message, and their relationship began to blossom. Ilana considered Mohammed a shy and modest man. He rarely took the initiative, felt uncomfortable on dates, jumped from topic to topic, or fell silent, appearing detached and introverted. Later, it turned out, these oddities weren't due to shyness, but rather a lack of interest. Mohammed was already seeing another woman, but for some reason, he kept this from his infatuated colleague. When Frick discovered the existence of a rival, she resolved to win over Mohammed and become his one and only. Their relationship was rocky during the first year, with the couple breaking up 3 times before rekindling, mainly due to Ilana's persistence. Her parents were aware of this and urged her to leave Mohammed, but she stood firm, believing she had found her one true love. Ilana often pampered her lover with gifts, made surprises, and brought him home-cooked meals. Mohammed seemed to just let himself be loved, readily accepting everything but reciprocating only occasionally. This one-sided game appeared to create an emotional dependence on Mohammed for Ilana. Unplanned pregnancy, wedding, and the beginning of a nightmare. In the summer of 2004, Frick informed her partner that they were going to have a child. This news came as a surprise to both of them, causing more anxiety than joy. Nonetheless, Mohammed, raised in a strict conservative Muslim country, felt compelled to follow tradition and marry the mother of his child before its birth. In early September that year, the couple had a wedding with 2 ceremonies. The first adhered to all cultural customs respected by the groom's family, and the second took place among the couple's friends at one of the trendiest restaurant complexes. The newlyweds seemed happy and in love, but no one could have imagined that their marriage would be the start of a nightmare that would end in tragedy. The couple moved into a spacious house in one of Ottawa's prestigious neighborhoods. In January 2005, they welcomed their first child, a daughter named Yasmina. Unfortunately, the birth of their daughter didn't strengthen their marriage. The young father was entirely focused on his career and planned to continue his education, with his wife and newborn daughter taking a back seat. Moreover, Mohammed didn't hide his disappointment, as he had hoped for a son. After the birth of her child, Ilana went on maternity leave, focusing on household chores and caring for her daughter. This irritated her husband, who, after returning from work, would retreat to his home office, spending little time with his wife and child. Over time, he became increasingly nervous and irritable, criticizing his wife's appearance, refusing to eat what she cooked, and calling her stupid and useless. Ilana tried not to complain about her family issues, not even to close friends or parents. However, one day, while talking to her mother on the phone, Mohammed, returning home in a bad mood, began berating and insulting his wife, which her mother overheard. She tried to defend her daughter, but her son-in-law blamed Ilana for their crumbling marriage. Anna tried to convince her daughter to file for divorce and leave the man treating her this way, but Ilana flatly refused, saying she loved her husband and would handle everything. She kept quiet about Mohammed's physical abuse, simply because the verbal abuse no longer seemed enough for him. In the summer of 2005, the situation spiraled out of control when Mohammed, in a fit of rage, punched Ilana in the face, breaking her nose. Ilana, with her baby in hand, fled to friends and filed a police report for domestic violence. She also decided to get a divorce and leave the man she had married for good. Unexpectedly, Mohammed began begging his wife to return, promising never to hit her again or even raise his voice. He swore he would change and that their family life would be everything Ilana had ever dreamed of, and he would control his emotions. Shamji seemed sincerely remorseful, but this behavior was driven by certain circumstances. The young neurosurgeon was preparing to enroll at Duke University, aiming to earn his doctorate, and a criminal conviction could end his promising medical career. Mohammed cared only for himself and his future, but he succeeded in convincing Ilana to drop the charges and not file for divorce. She even agreed to follow him to the United States, to North Carolina, where he was to continue his studies and earn a degree. A period of relative calm. Friends and family were baffled by why Ilana didn't leave her tyrant husband and withdrew her police report. When she announced her intention to move to another country with Mohammed, they tried to dissuade her, but Ilana stood firm. Frick was smart, educated, driven, and ambitious, financially independent, and capable of achieving any career goal. But her destructive relationship and emotional dependence on her husband were stronger. She was ready to abandon everything and sacrifice all for a marriage that didn't bring her happiness, only suffering. However, after moving to the United States, a period of relative calm came to their family. Mohammed was admitted to an elite biomedical engineering program, difficult to enter due to the intense competition. Meanwhile, Ilana enrolled in a master's program at the School of Policy and Health at Duke University, receiving a scholarship covering her tuition. The couple seemed to reconnect, spending more time together. Their relationship became stable enough that they decided to have a second child. In August 2007, they welcomed their younger daughter, Faiza. However, Mohammed again couldn't hide his disappointment, as he had hoped for a son. What does the happy family keep secret? In late summer 2009, the couple and their children returned to Canada, settling back into their home in Ottawa. This time, Ilana decided not to stay on maternity leave for long, and she quickly secured a position at a prestigious hospital as a family doctor, earning a solid reputation. Meanwhile, her husband balanced work, studies, and teaching at the university. In the late 2000s, social media was gaining popularity worldwide, and the couple started a personal blog, showcasing a seemingly ideal family in every sense. They posted photos of their travels, spoke about achievements in science, flaunted their luxurious lifestyle in a lavish home, attended prestigious conferences and trendy resorts, and spent time with friends at expensive restaurants. From the outside, they appeared to be a happy, successful, wealthy, and deeply in love couple with no problems. But their followers couldn't fathom what was hidden behind this facade. In reality, Mohammed again distanced himself from his wife, continuing to exert strict control over her. He carefully monitored who she interacted with, what she wore, and even checked her email and social media accounts. He openly criticized her appearance, style, and parenting methods. But Ilana preferred to remain silent about it. The tension and aggression from Shamji grew, with him yelling at his wife and blaming her for all their arguments and discord. In 2011, the talented neurosurgeon was offered a fellowship in spinal surgery at one of the largest medical centers in Calgary. He accepted the offer, but this time he went alone, leaving his family in Ottawa since Ilana couldn't leave her job. For over a year, they maintained a long-distance relationship, but during one visit home, Mohammed left his laptop on, and Ilana saw a message from a woman on his social media. The content suggested they were romantically involved. When Ilana directly confronted Mohammed, he didn't deny it, admitting to having an affair. This was another painful blow for Frick, and she again considered divorcing her rude, unfaithful husband. Her family was sure she wouldn't forgive him this time. Surprisingly, Ilana gave their family another last chance. Mohammed promised to end his affair and said they would start fresh in Toronto, where he had been offered a prestigious, well-paying job. Domestic violence and revenge affair. Shortly after moving, Mohammed expressed his continued desire for a son, suggesting they try again. Ilana agreed, thinking that having a third child might help solidify their family. In October 2013, they welcomed a long-awaited boy named Marius. The father was happy, but his attitude toward his wife remained unchanged. Over the next few years, Shamji focused entirely on his medical career, becoming an accredited neurosurgeon with a reputation for handling the toughest and most hopeless cases that other doctors avoided. Frick also advanced, becoming a delegate for the Ontario Medical Association. However, tension between the couple began to rise again. Mohammed didn't stop at rudeness and insults, but resumed hitting the mother of his children. During a family ski vacation, Ilana had a deep cut on her arm that required stitches, along with other injuries, but she claimed she hurt herself skiing. After returning home, Ilana confided in her best friend that all the injuries were inflicted by her husband following another argument over a newly discovered affair he had with a colleague. Ilana had overheard part of a phone conversation between Mohammed and his mistress, and when she asked him about it, he beat her. Her friend again suggested she divorce him, and when Ilana refused, joked that she should get a revenge affair. The women laughed, but the hurt wife might have thought it was a good way to get back at her cheating husband. The summer of 2016 was challenging. While the older kids were at camp and the youngest stayed with maternal grandparents, the couple's relationship completely fell apart. In early September, They celebrated their 12th wedding anniversary, sharing the news on social media. But a week later, they spoke of divorce. Mohammed refused, stating he was content, while a desperate Ilana had an affair with a colleague who had shown interest in her. She immersed herself in this new relationship, basking in the care and attention of another man, enjoying the long-forgotten feeling of being loved and desired. Did she run away with her lover, leaving her kids behind? On November 25, 2016, a heated argument broke out in the family when Elena told her husband that divorce was inevitable. The next day, she met with a divorce lawyer and then left for a 3-day medical conference in another city. During this time, Mohammed sent her messages, pleading with her to reconsider and save the marriage, at least for the children. On November 30th, Ilana returned home and made her final phone call to her parents. Her voice revealed some anxiety, but she assured them everything was fine. Later, it was discovered that she had tried calling the police that evening, but in her panic, misdialed one digit, leading to a tragic outcome. On December 1st, Anna couldn't reach her daughter, so she called her son-in-law to find out what had happened. Mohammed calmly told her that his wife had packed her bags in the middle of the night and fled to her lover, abandoning him and the children. Her parents didn't believe him, knowing their daughter would never leave her daughters and young son like that. They contacted a close friend of Alana's who lived nearby, asking her to discreetly watch the Shamji home while they took the first flight to Toronto and reported their daughter's disappearance to the police. Ilana's friend reported that her car was still in the driveway, which only heightened the family's concern. Upon arriving at their daughter's house, they found nothing immediately suspicious. But Mohammed was agitated, saying they had called the police unnecessarily and insisting that Ilana was with her lover. He had already told the police this version when they visited earlier, following the report of Mrs. Frikshamji's disappearance. Body in a suitcase. In the early morning hours of December 2nd, a man walking his dog along the river, about 24 miles from Shamji's home, saw a large suitcase at the base of the bridge. He was initially going to pass it by, but curiosity got the better of him, especially since the suitcase looked almost new. When he opened it, he was horrified to find the lifeless body of a blonde woman inside. He immediately notified the police, and the suitcase and body were sent to the medical examiner's office for identification and to determine the cause and circumstances of death. There were no issues with identification, as the criminal hadn't even bothered to remove the luggage tag from the suitcase from Ilana's recent trip to a conference. Her parents confirmed her identity. The body had multiple abrasions and bruises, but the cause of death was mechanical asphyxiation and a broken neck. The woman was dressed in pajamas and had no shoes, and based on the position of her body, she had been placed in the suitcase immediately after her death. The young witness Mohammed was arrested that evening at a coffee shop where he was meeting with a lawyer. It was evident he was planning to leave the country, but he didn't have the chance. He was charged with first-degree murder, but the neurosurgeon denied any involvement. However, a horrific detail of the incident emerged. It turned out that the couple's eldest daughter, 12-year-old Yasmina, had accidentally witnessed her mother's assassination. According to the girl, she heard screams and noise coming from her parents' room and ran there. She cracked open the door and saw her father kneeling behind the bed. Her mother was likely lying on the floor, but Yasmina couldn't see her from the doorway. Mohammed yelled at his daughter, ordering her to leave immediately, shut the door behind her, and go to bed. In the morning, he told the girls that their mother had left. Yasmina, despite her age, understood something terrible had happened, but couldn't imagine that her father had taken their mother's life. A confession, trial, and sentence. To spare his daughter from having to testify in court, the accused confessed and recounted what happened that dreadful evening. According to him, he and his wife argued about her infidelity and desire for a divorce. Mohammed claimed he didn't mean to harm Ilana, but things escalated spontaneously. The argument turned physical, and she tried to call the police, but he knocked the phone from her hand. She began screaming, and Mohammed struck her multiple times in the face, then pinned her to the floor and strangled her with his hands. At this moment, their daughter walked in but couldn't see what was happening due to the bed. When Mohammed realized his wife wasn't breathing, he attempted to resuscitate her, but it was in vain, as in his rage, he had broken her neck. He then put her body in a large suitcase, loaded it into the trunk of his car, and drove around aimlessly for hours, unsure of what to do next. Upon reaching a small bridge over a river, he decided to throw the suitcase down, hoping the current would carry it away, making it impossible to find. However, in the darkness, he didn't see that the suitcase got stuck against the bridge's foundation. In fall 2017, while the trial of the criminal surgeon was underway, a new scandal erupted involving his father, Farid Shamji, who made disparaging remarks about his deceased daughter-in-law. He attempted to justify his son's actions, saying his wife had been unfaithful and provoked him. These comments led to an investigation into the elderly man, and his medical license was revoked. In April 2019, Mohammed was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment, though with the possibility of parole in 14 years. Given the time served during the trial, he may be released as early as 2030. Moreover, Mohammed was forbidden from contacting his children or Alama's parents and ordered to pay them a large sum as compensation. He was also permanently stripped of his medical license. On December 20th, 2017, a press conference was held during which Mark Perez, special agent in charge of the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, announced a breakthrough in the disappearance of Mike Williams, a Tallahassee real estate appraiser who was originally presumed to have drowned while duck hunting on Lake Seminole on December 16, 2000, and was eaten by alligators. "Being here now, I can tell you what happened to Mike Williams," Perez said. "Mike Williams did not drown in the lake. He wasn't eaten by alligators. He didn't leave town and leave his wife and 18-month-old daughter behind. He was murdered. In the interest of the investigation, we cannot yet release details, but I am happy to report that this morning investigators notified the Williams family of recent discoveries in the case." Today's story is not only about love, betrayal, infidelity, and greed, but also about a mother's resilience. For 17 years and 4 days, Cheryl Williams, Mike's mom, disagreed that her son had drowned in Lake Seminole and pushed with tenacity for law enforcement to investigate her son's disappearance. She believed with all her heart that those responsible would be punished, believed even when no one else did. "I had two choices. He was alive or dead. I chose to believe he was alive, and I really think that's what helped me," Cheryl said on December 20th, 2017. "A lot of people called me crazy, but if I had given up, we never would have found him." The day before the press conference, Brian Winchester, a close friend of Mike and his wife Denise, who later married Brian, was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Mike's mother was right. Retribution came to those responsible, and ironically, they were the cause of the truth coming out. In 2000, Brian and Denise's affair, which began in 1997, turned into a murder. And years later, they went from lovers to strangers who didn't trust each other. Brian was very afraid that after the divorce, Denise would inform the police about what had happened to Mike, so he attacked her. Denise, on the other hand, went to great lengths to get him a life sentence. She was very persuasive in asking the jury for the maximum sentence, and it was these efforts that led to Brian having nothing to lose, and he made a deal with the prosecutor. Brian was sentenced to 20 years in 2017 for the kidnapping of Denise Williams, but he avoided a life sentence. Denise was celebrating the victory and was unaware that the conviction was part of a deal in which Brian Winchester, 49, admitted to planning the murder and a 17-year cover-up of the murder, and received immunity from any prosecution for his role in the case. In exchange, he led investigators to Mike's body and gave a full and truthful confession. It would only be a few months later, and on May 8, 2018, Denise Williams would be arrested. At first glance, things are a little confusing, aren't they? Let's break down this case in detail. Jerry Michael Williams was born on October 16, 1969, in Bradfordville, north of Tallahassee, the son of a bus driver and a kindergarten teacher. Family and friends called him Mike. Even though the family didn't have much money, and the boy, along with his older brother, grew up living in a trailer, those were happy times. The parents cared about their son's future, and instead of building a house, they set aside money for the education of both boys, who themselves worked part-time at night in supermarkets. The sons enrolled in North Florida Christian High School. There, Mike excelled. He became student council president, played soccer, and was active in the Key Club. At the age of 15, Mike started duck hunting as a hobby and met Denise Merrill. The young lad was a soccer player and student council president. Denise was a cheerleader and council secretary, and they began dating. Friends thought they were a great couple. While still in high school, Mike became best friends with Brian Winchester, whom Denise introduced him to. Brian later had a friend, Katie Thomas, and the two couples remained friends for the rest of Mike's life. After high school, Mike attended Florida State University, where he majored in political science and urban planning. The lovers graduated together. Denise became a public accountant. Mike became a real estate appraiser. Mike proved to be a valuable worker. He often worked 15 hours a day, and of course his career took off. In 1994, the young, successful man married Denise. It was around this time that Brian married Kathy as well. All four of them continued to stay in close contact. Mike loved his wife dearly, strived to provide for their family as best he could, and had incredible energy. At the age of 31, Mike Williams achieved considerable success. As a real estate appraiser, he was earning nearly $200,000 a year. The couple was able to afford a home in a small, upscale neighborhood on the east side of town, and in 1999 became happy parents. They had a daughter, whom the couple named Ansley. Mike's friends told me that he was always prudent. Since the young man was engaged in quite risky activities, he wanted to be sure that in case of disaster, his family would definitely be taken care of. Not surprisingly, Mike turned to his best friend, who was working as an insurance agent at the time. Ryan sold him 2 insurance policies for $250,000 and later for $500,000. In 2000, Mike's father passed away. Williams was so stunned by this suddenness that, wanting to financially secure his own family, he again turned to a friend. Brian helped Mike to insure his life for $1 million. Thus, about 6 months before his disappearance, the life of the loving father of the family was insured for almost $2 million. According to Denise, on the morning of December 16, 2000, her husband woke up early to go duck hunting on Lake Seminole, a large reservoir connected to the Apalachicola River. It was the day of their 6th wedding anniversary, and the couple planned to celebrate the date at night in Apalachicola, a small town on the bayou. The wife and daughter waited for Mike at home at noon, but he never returned. Naturally, Denise became concerned and called her father, who in turn called Mike's best friend, Brian Winchester. Together with his father, Brian drove to Lake Seminole. There they found Mike's Ford Bronco car near the boat dock. But Mike himself was nowhere to be found. The men went around to all the places Mike liked to hunt, but couldn't even find the boat. So they decided to call the police. After investigators from the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Agency were called, the search for Mike began. A few hours later, a helicopter pilot found the boat drifting about 225 feet from the boat ramp. A search of the boat turned up Mike's shotgun, still in its case. Apparently, he never got to use it. The search became a rescue operation. Locals believed that before the 3 rivers were dammed to form the lake, the reservoir was the site of an orchard. Thus, the lake got its name Stump Field, due to the many remaining stumps that protruded above and below the water level, requiring careful handling of any motorized boat in the area. Because of this, searchers speculated that Williams hit a stump on his boat, fell out, and submerged himself in the water. His wading boots filled with water, and he probably drowned when he couldn't get out. Several other agencies were called in to help, including a dive team from Montgomery, Alabama, and the Jackson County Sheriff's Office. But the extensive and methodical search yielded nothing. Mike was never located. A week passed and the rescue operation turned into a body search operation. Teams were given probe holes to probe the bottom of the lake, and dogs were brought to the site. 10 days into the search, volunteers found a camouflage-patterned hunting hat that could not be linked to Williams. Officials with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Agency speculated that Mike had been eaten by alligators, which is why the body could not be found. There were actually quite a few alligators living in the lake. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement found no signs indicating a violent death and agreed with that theory. After 5 weeks, the search was called off. The day after the search was called off, Denise held a memorial service for Mike, less than 2 months after the alleged accident. It seemed to everyone that Denise had come to terms with the loss of her husband, but Mike's mother had not. 6 months later, in June 2001, an angler discovered wading boots floating in the lake. Divers searched the lake area and retrieved a lightweight hunting jacket and flashlight from the bottom. In one of the jacket's pockets was a hunting license with Williams's name and signature. The find raised many questions. Neither the hunting jacket nor the boots had visible teeth marks indicative of an alligator attack. None of the items found showed signs of having been in the water for 6 months. The boots were not slimy and the flashlight still worked. However, a week later, Denise's attorney asked the court to declare Mike Williams dead. Based on the items found, he suggested that alligators and other aquatic life had swallowed the body whole. The motion was granted. The death certificate said Mike died on December 16, 2000. Cause of death: accidental drowning while duck hunting on Lake Seminole. The body has yet to be recovered. This is how Mike Williams's story might have ended if not for Cheryl Williams, who refused to give up and continued to search for her son. "All I know is that I can't stop looking for him until I find him," she said. Cheryl's efforts seriously strained her relationship with her former sister-in-law. Denise demanded she stop searching and accept reality. She said, "I'm tired of seeing articles about Mike and his disappearance. I just want to move on with my life. If you keep pushing this investigation, you will never see your granddaughter again." Cheryl couldn't give up on her son, and Denise carried out her threat. If not for the mother's persistence, her son's story might have remained submerged at the bottom of a dark, algae-covered lake. It took Cheryl Williams 3 years to convince law enforcement officials to open an investigation into her young son's disappearance. "I made phone calls, put up signs about my missing son, wrote to the governor of Florida every day, compiled my notes into an evidence book, asked people to post on social media, and contacted reporters," Cheryl will tell you years later. The persistent mother contacted Matthew Oresco, an alligator expert. In his response, he explained that alligators do not feed during the cold winter months. Cold weather causes water temperatures to drop, so alligators don't feed in the winter. All they do is maintain their body temperature. 14 degrees is too cold for an alligator to be interested in food at all. Moreover, Oresco wrote that after an alligator kill, there is always forensic evidence left behind. Eventually, after 3 years, Cheryl Williams convinced law enforcement to drop the ridiculous alligator theory and launch an official investigation into her son's disappearance. The case was reopened because of little-known facts regarding alligators' eating habits. Evidence gathered from interviews and a little official data convinced investigators that Williams' death was no accident. "My gut feeling is that Mike did not die in Lake Seminole, and that's the general consensus of all the law enforcement agencies working on this case," said Rami Austin, a former investigator with the 2nd District State's Attorney's Office who prosecuted Mike's case. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Agency initially took over the case because Williams was considered a missing hunter. Officers spent 735 hours searching a 10-acre section of the lake for the body, but didn't spend a minute looking for signs of wrongdoing. Jackson County Sheriff's deputies brought in to help with the search also did not consider other possibilities. Investigators interviewed everyone involved in the search, and police officer David Arnett, who was present at the scene that day, years later said, "Some things immediately looked strange. Williams didn't usually hunt alone. His truck was found in an undeveloped area from which he would have had to drag the boat over mud, not on the nearby concrete boat launch he usually used. A terrible storm that night should have pushed the boat to the east shore, but it was found on the west shore. The boat's motor wasn't running, but it was full of gasoline. If Mike had been driving the boat and fell out of it, it would have continued to float in circles until it ran out of gas." Unfortunately, law enforcement began to doubt too late that they were dealing with a simple drowning. The crime scene had already been trampled by numerous volunteers and searchers. A car that could have served as a clue was taken by the family without any verification. Potential witnesses were missed. Denise Williams and Brian Winchester became suspicious to investigators because they learned that Winchester had divorced his wife Kathy and married Denise. They also learned of Denise's unexpected financial gain of nearly $2 million from her late husband's life insurance policy. Detectives determined that it was Winchester who sold the policy to Mike. They also found it strange that Denise, as Mike's wife, did not want to have anything to do with the investigation and tried to prevent Cheryl's activity, even forbidding the grandmother to communicate with her granddaughter. In 2005, the newly married couple were called in for questioning, which gave nothing new to the investigation. Brian provided an alibi for the morning of the disappearance of Mike Williams. He said he was 60 miles from the lake, at home, in bed, as his ex-wife Kathy could attest. He said he had intended to go hunting with his father-in-law in the morning, but overslept. Denise's interrogation also yielded no new leads. In 2008, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement announced that Mike's disappearance was not an accident, and they believe he was the victim of a crime. However, without sufficient evidence, they alas cannot prosecute. We have suspicions, but we need proof. Another investigation failed to find out her son's fate, but Cheryl Williams did not give up again. Her efforts led to the Discovery Cable Channel doing a story on Mike's disappearance and subsequent investigations in late 2011. By then, Cheryl had become disillusioned with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, believing it was either incompetent or uninterested in solving the case. Beginning in 2012, Mike's mother wrote about one letter a day to the governor, Rick Scott, asking him to either assign the investigation to another agency or appoint a special prosecutor to do so. Cheryl sent 2,600 letters to the governor over 9 years. In 2012, Denise caught Brian cheating and they broke up. The following year, Denise filed for divorce. After a few more years, an appraisal of the former family home was to take place, after which even property issues would no longer bind them. This event was a turning point in Mike's case. Brian didn't want a divorce. Denise didn't want to continue the relationship. They were constantly fighting, and the Williams investigation was poking fun at them. Brian would call Denise, and she stopped returning his calls. He couldn't handle the stress level. On August 5, 2016, the day a real estate appraisal was due as part of a court order, Denise left her home to drive to work at Florida State University. While talking to her sister on the phone, she saw someone climb over the back seat of her car. It turned out to be Winchester. Brian pressed a loaded gun against Denise's ribs and told her to drive straight ahead. He said he had to do that because she wasn't answering his calls. Denise tried to calm Brian down, agreed with everything he said, and promised to give him a chance to save their marriage. Brian believed it. Denise assured him that she wouldn't go to the police and report what he had just done, and Brian got out of the car. As he got out, he took the brown sheet, plastic sheeting, bleach sprayer, and tools with him. It became clear that Denise had miraculously escaped death. Denise called emergency services. Brian was quickly arrested and charged with kidnapping, which is a first-degree felony in Florida and carries a life sentence as the maximum penalty. He was also charged with domestic violence and armed burglary. The court decided to keep Brian in custody without bail. Cheryl Williams expressed hope that this development will lead to the solving of her son's disappearance case. Brian is not going to let Denise run around alone with all that money, she told the New York Daily News. I pray that he will tell us what really happened. And Brian did tell, bargaining himself an extremely favorable deal with the prosecutor and avoiding a life sentence. At first, I think we were all doing really well. But I wasn't a good husband. Brian began his story. One day, I found a note in my first wife Kathy's purse and realized she was cheating on me. I wanted revenge. We often went to bars and concerts with Denise and Mike. I had been friends with Denise since high school. I was never really attracted to her. But after Kathy cheated on me, I started looking at other women differently. The affair between Brian and Denise began in October 1997. One-time drunken sex at a rock concert quickly escalated to frequent secret meetings. We started meeting at hotels during the workday. We met whenever we had the opportunity. Brian recounted, He did not want a divorce. Denise made it clear that she would never divorce her husband. Public opinion was important to her, and she did not want to share custody of her daughter. Over time, the affair became more than just meeting for casual sex. Denise and Brian thought of themselves as a couple, exchanging gifts and love letters. It became clear that they couldn't go on like this. They could not be without each other, and divorce was unacceptable to Denise. Her pious image was not to be harmed. Around this time, Mike almost died in a hunting accident. Brian saved him, and Denise suddenly saw a way out of the situation. After the deal with the prosecutor, Brian will reveal, the year 2000 prompted us to start talking about Mike and Kathy's death. Denise wanted it all on me, not her, and she wanted a scenario where it wasn't a murder but an accident. She wanted death to be left up to God. That way she could live with it. After considering various options, Brian and Denise settled on a boating accident. In doing so, they timed the murder so that they could get the maximum possible payout on Mike's life insurance policy. They both realized that Mike had to be killed before one of the 3 policies expired at the end of December 2000. The plan was in place. Brian called his friend to go hunting. He said he'd found a great spot on the shores of Lake Seminole. Mike expected to go there with Brian and return home by noon to celebrate his anniversary with his wife. I told him that we were going to go to a special place and that he absolutely had to bring his wading boots with him. I had to make sure he took them with him because it was believed that if you fell overboard in wading boots, you would drown very quickly. The plan was to make death look like an accidental drowning. Once Brian and Mike were in the water, Brian pushed Mike out of the boat, but instead of sinking, he grabbed onto the stumps and began to wade through them to the shore. Brian panicked. I didn't know what to do. Mike started calling loudly for help. I didn't know how to get out of this situation. I had a shotgun. I was panicking and I shot him in the head. I didn't think about what I was doing. Things didn't go according to plan, and I needed to cover up what happened. There was hardly any time left. I should have been back home by now and getting ready to go hunting with my father-in-law. No one knew I was at the lake with Mike, so I decided it would be best for me to drive home and pretend like I had overslept. I drove home and hoped that Kathy was still asleep. I entered the house as quietly as I could. Katie was asleep. My phone was on the floor. I went to bed, called my father-in-law, and apologized. Brian did everything he could to create an alibi for himself. Then he hid the body. Denise didn't know that Brian had shot Mike in the head and buried him. Brian tried to tell her, but she didn't want to listen. It was enough for her that her husband was gone. Denise wanted to go on living with the idea that it was God who kept him from swimming out and let him drown. According to Brian, they promised each other that neither of them would ever say anything. Denise and Brian justified what happened by saying that the main reason Mike was killed was because it was impossible for them to live together. We said the money was just the cherry on the cake, Brian would pronounce in court. Investigators learned that it was Brian who planted a hat, boots, flashlight, and license. First, he needed to keep searchers from leaving a lake, and afterwards he needed grounds to pronounce Mike dead so Denise could get insurance, since a recognition process usually takes about 5 years. The lovers managed it in just 7 months. Including Social Security and other benefits, Denise received about $2 million. On May 8, 2018, Denise Williams was charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and accessory to a felony, which carried a life sentence. Denise pleaded not guilty to all 3 charges. In February 2019, she was sentenced to life in prison. 5 months later, Mike and Denise's daughter, Ansley, received all of her late father's assets and insurance money owed to Denise. In January 2020, Denise Williams appealed the conviction and life sentence. Her attorney argued before Florida's First District Court of Appeal that there was no evidence that she was involved in committing the murder. In November 2020, the murder conviction was overturned, but the 30-year sentence for conspiracy to commit murder was upheld. Denise is now in custody at the Florida Women's Reception Center. She will be 78 years old when she is released. Brian Winchester was transferred to Madison Correctional Institute in Florida to serve the remainder of his sentence. His current release date is set for July 30th, 2036. He will be 67 years old. Ansley, daughter of Mike and Denise, insists her mother is innocent and places the blame on Brian Winchester. She refused to speak to any media regarding the outcome of the case and her personal life. According to Cheryl and Nick, Ansley's uncle, they have not been able to connect with Ansley. Cheryl is very sorry that she has lost not only her son, but also her granddaughter. 22-year-old Brandon Gonsalves lived with his small family in Goregaon West. Now Goregaon West was becoming a crowded suburb in Mumbai city. Besides Gonsalves, his family only consisted of his mother and older sister. On December 19, 2016, like every day, Gonsalves went for a morning walk from his home to Ari Colony. Usually, he would return home within an hour after his stroll, but today he didn't come back until afternoon. Concerned, Gonsalves' mother Seema and older sister Kashma first called his friends because he had left his phone at home today. Despite contacting some friends, they couldn't find any information about Gonsalves. Now, the sun had already set, and night was slowly falling. Worried about their son, Seema took her daughter and went to the nearby Dindoshi police station to file a missing person report. Now, besides Gonsalves' family and friends, the police are also trying to find him. Meanwhile, the Dindoshi police station had distributed Gonsalves' photo to nearby police stations as well. However, amidst this, around 12:30 in the afternoon on December 22nd, a call comes to the nearby Ari police station. The caller reports that he has just seen a headless body. Upon hearing this, the police promptly rushed to the reported location in Ari Colony. Upon arrival, the scene they witness astonishes them. There, beneath a tree, lies a body without a head, neck, or clothes, and upon seeing it, it seemed as if someone had placed it there deliberately. Now, witnessing this sight, the police cordoned off the area completely, not allowing any ordinary person to approach. Afterwards, the police began their investigation by first examining the area nearby. Just 20 meters away from the body, the police found the head and clothes stained with blood. Additionally, a few meters away from the body, the police also found some other items used in worship, such as a mirror, coconut, padukas, threads, turmeric powder, and kumkum powder, aka vermilion. Anyway, the police collected these items and sent the body to a nearby hospital for post-mortem. Subsequently, the files of missing persons were checked at the Ari police station, and the identification of this dead body was made with a boy named Brandon Gonsalves. As I mentioned earlier, the missing report of Brandon Gonsalves had been distributed to all nearby police stations by Dindoshi police. So now the Ari police confirmed that he was the same boy who had gone missing 3 days ago on December 19th. Well, now Gonsalves' family is also informed, and thus the missing case of Gonsalves turns into a murder case. After this, as far as I have read, perhaps the police had to form 8+ teams to search for Gonsalves' killer, including a special team from the crime branch. But seeing the body of her only son in this condition, Gonsalves' mother Seema and elder sister Kashma were both in a terrible state of distress. So much so that when Seema saw her son in this condition, she fainted upon seeing the body. However, the police quickly began their investigation to find the culprits. On the other hand, some shocking details emerged in Gonsalves' post-mortem report. The post-mortem report stated that Gonsalves' tongue, voice box, skin from his right cheek, and even his entire neck were missing, with the neck bone intact. This means that someone had killed Gonsalves so brutally that even the small spine is fragment of our neck, the neck spine, was broken. All these things were horrifying the police because initially, the police thought this case seemed to be a result of personal rivalry, as if someone had killed Gonsalves to settle a score, but the police were soon to be proven wrong. Actually, according to the post-mortem report, it was found that Gonsalves' death occurred due to the separation of his head from his body. However, forensic pathologists also checked whether Gonsalves was given any drugs or substances before being killed, but nothing like that was found in any post-mortem report. After that, the police found out that Gonsalves was murdered 3 days before his body was found, between 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. on the same day he went missing. Additionally, there were no signs of any fight, struggle, or injury on his body, indicating that Gonsalves didn't even try to save himself until his last breath. Furthermore, 2 marks were found on Gonsalves' body. Actually, there were 2 cross symbols on his forehead and right hand, which seemed to have been made with a sharp object. After learning about all these things, this case became even more intriguing for the police and investigators, because now there were a lot more questions in front of the police. Looking at Gonsalves' body, it seemed as if his body had been cut twice. First, his head was separated from his shoulders, and then later his neck was cut from the head. Additionally, forensic experts said that where Gonsalves' body was found, there was absolutely no evidence of his murder, because not a single trace of blood was found there. So it was clear that Gonsalves was killed somewhere else, and then some parts of his body were removed to perform some rituals or something similar. Later, his body and clothes were thrown away in this deserted place. Here, when the police found the materials of worship and glass, coconuts, slippers, turmeric, and vermilion at the crime scene, for the first time, this case seems like a human sacrifice. After the possibility arose that Gonsalves might be taken to another location and harmed, the police began checking the CCTV cameras around the Ari colony. But first, they checked the CCTV cameras around his house. They saw Gonsalves leaving with his dog around 7 o'clock in the morning and returning after a morning walk within an hour. However, just 10 minutes later, Gonsalves left his house again, but this time with a bag. Now, what was in that bag could not be determined because the bag itself was not found. But then, a little further from Gonsalves' house, the police spotted a white Audi car in another CCTV footage with 2 people inside, a driver and a woman in a white Punjabi suit. It was shown in the CCTV that they were following Gonsalves slowly with their car. The woman wearing a white Punjabi suit is given directions to the driver, telling him to take the car in that direction. However, the police also questioned Gonsalves' family members to see if anyone might know that woman and driver, but the police didn't get any good response from there either. The police suspected that there might be more than 2 people in the car, and unfortunately, the day Gonsalves' body was found, the 2 CCTV cameras in that area were not working. This raised suspicion for the police that Gonsalves was abducted on December 19th in this same car and then murdered elsewhere, with his body being thrown in a deserted place in Ari Colony on the dark night or morning of December 22nd. But since then, investigators have felt that perhaps a local person might be involved in this murder case, because the police checked 70-plus CCTV cameras in this entire case, but none of them recorded anything suspicious that would raise suspicion on any individual. The investigators clarified that perhaps the killers were aware of the location of every CCTV camera in the Ari colony. This helped them in escaping from the colony and Goragaon. This clears one thing, that the killer was someone who was well acquainted with Goragaon and the colony, because an outsider couldn't have known every road in CCTV so well. The investigators explored all possible angles of Gonsalves' killing, such as a love affair angle, whether someone jealous killed Gonsalves, and a personal rivalry, human sacrifice angle, robbery, and property dispute. But the police never found any leads in any angle. Although for some time, the police kept the angle of human sacrifice on the table and even questioned several tantrics, babas, and black magicians about the cut parts of the body, the mark of the cross on the forehead and the right hand, whether there was any connection between them or not. But the police didn't get any help from here either. Gonsalves was a middle-class boy who decided to graduate in arts. However, due to some reasons, he dropped out of college as well. His father had passed away 3 years ago, leaving Gonsalves in a state of depression for a long time. During the police investigation, Gonsalves' call records were also checked, but no suspicious numbers were found. In fact, Gonsalves rarely talked to anyone, except for his family, or perhaps 3 or 4 friends. But what intrigued the police in this case was finding a diary in Gonsalves' room. Within it were some sketches that further complicated this case. Actually, if these sketches are examined closely, it will be apparent that they tell the story of 2 sacrifices. In the first, a person is attempting to cut off an animal's head while wearing a suit. Meanwhile, in the second sacrifice, a man's head is being cut off with a saw. In addition to these, an attempt has been made to portray the SpongeBob cartoon character as a monster. On the other side of the page, a picture of a deer without a head has been drawn, and right next to it, only the head of a lion cub has been drawn. Furthermore, when the police went inside Gonsalves's house, they found a strange sign on a wall just behind the door, as if it were some sort of cult symbol. Now, what was even more surprising was that when the Mumbai police tried to recreate the crime scene with Gonsalves's dog, the startling thing was that Gonsalves's dog went straight to where Gonsalves's body was lying with a tree. After a while, his dog arrived at the spot where Gonsalves's body was found, just a few meters away. Among all the cases we've explained on this channel so far, this case was the weirdest, like how Gonsalves's dog somehow went to the places where his body was found. It's possible that when Gonsalves first went out for a walk with his dog on December 19th, he might have already gone to the place where his body was found. Another point is that the white Audi car following Gonsalves might have been known to him, and he might have gone with them willingly, sitting in the car. Additionally, it's possible that after returning home, Gonsalves took the bag with him, which might have contained items related to worship like coconut, paducas, etc. Because it's also being said on the internet that maybe Gonsalves sacrificed himself. Today, it's been over 7 years since this case, but the murderer of Brandon Gonsalves is still unknown. Meanwhile, Gonsalves' mother and sister have made numerous visits to the police station and the crime branch office to find out the status of their son Brandon Gonsalves' murder case. During this time, Gonsalves' mother and sister were afraid that the police might close Gonsalves' murder case. Due to this reason, Seema's elder daughter Kashma appealed to Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the state's chief minister to seek justice. Well, if this case gets solved in the future, we will definitely update you through this channel's community post. But so far, this case remains unsolved. With this, Brandon Gonsalves' case also concludes here. Before moving forward, quickly subscribe to the channel. This is strange. You haven't subscribed to the channel yet. Quickly subscribe to it. Now we are jumped to the next story. This is the story of Madanapalli city in the state of Andhra Pradesh, India, which is Asia's largest tomato market. Besides, there are many mountains here as well. It was January 24th, 2021, around 8:30 p.m. on Sunday night in Madanapalli, when Dr. V. Purushotham Naidu, the head of the Naidu family, called his friend Raju and said on the phone, "Both my daughters are no longer in this world. Alekhya, 27, and Saidivya, 22, have both passed away, but there's nothing to worry about. Tomorrow morning, they will come back through reincarnation because the Kal Yuga is ending, and the Satyug will begin from tomorrow." Upon hearing this, Raju said to his friend Dr. Naidu, "Everything is normal at home? Speaking such language against your daughters doesn't suit you." In response, Dr. Naidu said, "No, Raju, I am telling the truth. In a while, both I and your sister-in-law will leave our bodies in Kal Yuga and be born again in Satyug." Upon hearing this, Dr. Naidu's friend Raju started feeling extremely restless. Consequently, he abruptly ended the call and within a few minutes arrived at Dr. Naidu's house. Raju reached there, knocked on the door, and just as the door was about to open, Dr. Naidu himself appeared, looking completely normal. But when Raju went inside and saw the scene there, his eyes widened in shock, because Dr. Naidu had spoken the truth. Lying on the ground in the prayer room of his house was the lifeless body of his 27-year-old daughter, Alekhya. She had completed her master's in Bhopal and now was preparing for the civil services. Her face was pale, and blood was oozing from various places. After this, Dr. Naidu took Raju to another room adjacent to the prayer room, where the dead body of his 22-year-old daughter, Saidivya, lay on the ground. She had been struck with a trident of Lord Shiva on her forehead, and a small brass pot placed in the prayer room was inserted into her mouth. The clothes were removed from both bodies, and they were wrapped in red cloth. Additionally, their hair was partially cut, and they were placed in front of the statue of Lord Shiva in the temple. They had scattered many worship materials around the bodies. However, despite seeing the bodies of their daughters, there was no sign of tension or sorrow on the faces of Dr. Naidu and his wife Padmaja. This behavior of his friend and his wife seemed very strange to Raju. Therefore, he bids them goodbye and leaves their house. However, instead of going home, he goes straight to the police station and tells the police the whole story of how these educated parents sacrificed their daughters. He also informs them about the mental condition of Dr. Naidu and his wife. However, the police were having little belief in Raju's story after hearing this strange tale, because for the past year, Dr. Naidu and his family, who had been living in the new house in Madinapal, had earned quite a reputation in the city. Anyway, after that, the police station in charge, along with some officers, directly reached the Naidu family's house. When the police knocked on the door, once again it was Dr. Naidu who opened it, but seeing her husband's friend with him, Padmaja got very angry and started shouting at the police because they had once again disrupted their worship. Now, the argument between the police and the Naidu family had attracted neighbors from nearby. Now, as soon as the police entered the house and saw what was inside, they too were astonished. Later, after hearing Raju, the police realized that it was a case of superstition. Although Mr. and Mrs. Naidu repeatedly tried to convince the police that both their daughters would return to life before sunrise tomorrow, they were just saying that they only need a day's time, and tomorrow morning both our daughters will come back to life. Then you all will be surprised. But the police knew that both girls were dead, so how could they come back to life? Therefore, Mr. and Mrs. Naidu were first explained with great difficulty. But when they still didn't understand, the police showed some firmness and took both of them to the police station. Afterwards, a forensic team was called in to investigate the crime scene. The forensic team continued their examination for some time and then sent the bodies for post-mortem. Now, the police have started investigating both inside and outside the house. Here, the police learned from neighbors of the Naidu family that someone from the family used to go out daily to buy something, but for the past 3 days, no one has come out of the house, nor has anyone gone inside, not even the maid who used to clean the house, as these people did not even call her. After that, the police directly approached the maid, who told them that 3 days ago, she was told by the Naidus that we are going to perform a special worship in the house for 3 days, and until we call you, do not come to work at the house. On the other hand, upon checking both girls' social media profiles and bookshelves inside the house, the police found out that Alekia highly respects Indian philosopher Osho. On his social media posts, Osho's name appeared repeatedly, indicating that he was one of Alekia's favorite people. Additionally, beside Alekia's dead body, was a book by the spiritual guru Meher Baba. Besides, pictures of Shri Sai Baba, Meher Baba, and Osho were plastered all over their house. Furthermore, neighbors often heard prayers and tantric chants from their house, and several times they saw some swamis entering the house. On the other hand, what was surprising was that just a few days before the murder, Alekia posted twice on her Instagram. In one post she wrote, "Work is done," and in the second post, "Shiva is coming." Well, only Dr. Naidu and Padmaja, who were present in the custody, could reveal the truth behind this. However, controlling Padmaja was proving to be extremely difficult for the police. But before the custody, when the police were taking both husband and wife for a COVID test, Padmaja started saying, "I am Shiva myself. Because of my body particles, COVID has spread everywhere. It did not come from China." After getting their COVID tests done, Dr. Naidu informed the police about his background. Actually, Dr. Naidu had a master's in philosophy and science. In addition, he had obtained a PhD and was currently a professor of chemistry at Government Degree College for Women, Madinapali. His wife, Padmaja, was a gold medalist in mathematics and had been teaching at the famous schools of Madanapal for nearly 23 years, including at Masterminds IIT Talent High School. Alongside, she also had a master's in science. Additionally, Alekhya, 27, was a postgraduate from Bhopal and then an aspirant for civil services. Furthermore, Saidivya, a 22-year-old, was training at the A.R. Rahma Music Conservatory in Mumbai after completing her Bachelor of Business Administration course. However, due to the lockdown, both of them had to return home. You might also wonder why, with such educated family members, these individuals attempted suicide. You'll find the answer by the end of the video. Afterwards, Alekhya picked up Lord Shiva's trident from the temple and thrust it into her sister Divya's forehead. Then a copper vessel was placed in her mouth. Following the death of her younger sister Divya, Alekhya told her mother that now she had to kill her. As a result, Padmaja struck Alekhya on the head with a dumbbell kept in the house. Consequently, Alekhya also died shortly thereafter. After killing both their daughters, both the husband and wife wandered around their bodies for quite some time. Now, because of the insistence of the wife and daughter, it was Dr. Nayudu's turn. Perhaps out of fear, he called his friend and told him the whole matter, and if he hadn't made that call, perhaps neither of them would be in this world today. However, due to this, Padmaja scolded her husband, Dr. Nayudu, a lot, saying, "You are a coward. Because of you, our secret got out, and our daughters couldn't come back." After seeing all this, it was finalized in this case that due to mental illness, all these family members had planned this, and it was revealed from a psychiatrist's source that their entire family was dealing with a rare disorder called shared psychotic disorder. Actually, in this disorder, more than two people who are in close relationships have a similar way of thinking. And it's because of this disorder that Alekhya and Saidivya are no longer in this world today. In this double murder case, Alekhya had a Canadian friend who told the print media that he couldn't believe for many days that Alekhya could do such a thing. After questioning on Monday evening, funeral of both these girls were performed, and permission for this was given only to Dr. Nayudu, while the girl's mother, Padmaja, was not allowed to participate for some reasons. In my opinion, in this case, Saidivya and Dr. Purushottam Nayudu seem innocent to me. Although if they hadn't fallen into the temptation of Alekhya and Padmaja, perhaps this would have been a happy family today. So with this, the case comes to an end here. Friends, how did you like this combined cases? In the midst of winter, when families gather to celebrate peace and joy, a sinister shadow loomed over the picturesque town of Dover, Arkansas. It was December 1987, a time meant for festivity and love, but for one family, it became a scene of overwhelming horror. This is the chilling tale of the Christmas killer Ronald Gene Simmons, a man who transformed the season of giving into a time of unspeakable tragedy. But what leads a person to destroy what they once cherished? What darkness lies within the human mind that can turn a father into a monster? From decorated war hero to a man convicted of the worst family massacre in American history, we'll delve into the depths of a mind clouded by secrets and rage, where the line between protector and predator became fatally blurred. To understand the mind behind the massacre, we must journey back to the origins of Ronald Gene Simmons. His story begins not with violence, but with a seemingly ordinary life, marked by service and family. Ronald Gene Simmons was born on July 15, 1940, in Chicago, Illinois. His father died of a stroke when Ronald was 3. His mother got married again in less than a year to a civil engineer for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, who was transferred to Arkansas. Little is known about Simmons's early childhood, but it was a life that took a turn towards discipline and commitment when Ronald dropped out of school and enlisted in the United States Navy in 1957, and later the U.S. Air Force. Simmons served with distinction. Over a 22-year career, He received several commendations, including the Bronze Star Medal, the Republic of Vietnam Gallantry Cross, and the Air Force Ribbon for excellent marksmanship. But behind the facade of a decorated military man, there were undercurrents of turmoil. Simmons married Rebecca Ulibarri in 1960 in New Mexico, and together they had 7 children. However, the veneer of a normal family life was shattered in 1981 when allegations emerged that Simmons had been the assaulting his 15-year-old daughter, Sheila, and had fathered a child with her. Fearing prosecution, Simmons uprooted his family, moving them from New Mexico to a desolate 13-acre tract of land in Pope County, 6.5 miles north of Dover, Arkansas, known as Mockingbird Hill. This property, isolated and ringed with a makeshift fence, up to 10 feet tall, became a fortress of sorts, a place where Simmons could exert total control. The residents didn't have a phone or indoor plumbing. But what was it that drove a man of discipline and service to the edge of such darkness? Was it the fear of losing control over his family, the desperation to conceal his illicit acts, or something deeper, a more sinister aspect of his psyche yet to be revealed? The facade of the family man began to crumble, revealing a tyrannical figure, ruling his household with an iron fist. The family, once a symbol of joy and unity, became prisoners in their own home. This descent into tyranny was but a prelude to the horror that would unfold, unraveling the chilling transformation of Ronald Gene Simmons from a respected military man to one of the most notorious mass murderers in American history. In November 1979, Simmons retired from the Air Force and military service. He did some low-paying jobs in the nearby town of Russellville, Arkansas. He worked as an accounts receivable clerk at Woodline Motor Freight, but had to resign after multiple reports of inappropriate sexual advances. He worked for about a year and a half at a Sinclair mini-mart, but had to quit on December 18, 1987, because of low wages. 2 of the elder children, Billy and Sheila, had moved out, got married, and started their own families. So by the time of the murders, there were only 7 people living in the house. The calm of the holiday season in 1987 was shattered in Dover, Arkansas, by a series of heinous crimes. Ronald Gene Simmons' descent into murderous madness began shortly before Christmas, on December 22nd. The Simmons family home, once a haven of domestic life, turned into a chilling stage for an unthinkable act. Ronald Gene Simmons, armed with a .22 caliber pistol, commenced a killing spree that would become the worst family massacre in American history. His first victims were his wife, 46-year-old Rebecca, and eldest son, 26-year-old Ronald Jr., bludgeoned with a crowbar and shot. And he strangled Ronald Jr.'s daughter and his granddaughter, 3-year-old Barbara. Their demise was just the beginning. Simmons lay in wait for his other children, feigning a festive spirit, only to mercilessly end their lives. One by one. Later that day, the Dover school bus dropped off the younger kids for their Christmas break from school. In a macabre ritual, Simmons systematically strangled and drowned his younger children, displaying a level of brutality that defies comprehension. The youngest victims, mere toddlers, met a similar fate, their innocence stolen in the most atrocious way. Simmons told them he had gifts for each of them, which he wanted to give one at a time, then strangled them and held under the water in a rain barrel. First to receive her gift was his eldest daughter, 17-year-old Loretta. His 3 other children, 14-year-old Eddie, 11-year-old Marianne, and 8-year-old Becky, were murdered in the same brutal manner. He then dumped the bodies in one of the cesspits he had made his children dig days before. But the horror did not end there. On December 26th, as the rest of the world celebrated, Simmons' remaining family members arrived for a holiday visit, unaware of the nightmare that awaited them. 23-year-old Simmons' son Billy, his 21-year-old daughter-in-law Renata, and their child were the next to fall victim to his unfathomable rage. Billy and Renata were both shot dead. Their bodies were left by the dining room table next to the decorated Christmas tree with unopened gifts and covered with their own coats and some bedding. Then their 20-month-old son, Trey, was strangled and drowned. The same fate befell his 24-year-old daughter, Sheila. her 33-year-old husband Dennis, and their children. Simmons strangled his and Sheila's child, 6-year-old Sylvia, and finally, his 21-month-old grandson Michael. The bodies were meticulously laid out, a grim tableau that defied any sense of humanity. He then covered their bodies with coats. Sheila's body was laid on the dining room table and covered with Rebecca Simmons' best tablecloth. He wrapped the bodies of Trey and Michael in plastic sheeting, and they were left in abandoned cars behind the Simmons home. Simmons then embarked on a chillingly ordinary series of errands, his actions a stark contrast to the carnage he had just inflicted. He drove to a Sears store in Russellville to pick up Christmas gifts previously ordered for his family. That night he went out for a drink at a local bar. When he returned home, he spent the night and the next day drinking beer and watching television surrounded by the dead bodies of his family. On December 28th, the killing spree spilled over into the town of Russellville. In the morning, Simmons drove a car that had belonged to his son, Ronald Jr., to a Walmart in Russellville and purchased a second firearm. Fueled by a mix of revenge and rage, Simmons targeted those he felt had wronged him. The violence was indiscriminate, claiming the lives of acquaintances and strangers alike. His former workplace, a law firm, became the stage for his continued rampage. 24-year-old Kathy Kendrick, a secretary who had rebuffed his advances, was his first victim. She was fatally shot. The brutality continued at the Taylor Oil Company, where he shot and wounded the 38-year-old owner Russell Taylor, who was also the owner of Sinclair Mini Mark, from which Simmons had recently resigned. He also killed a complete stranger in the building and shot at another employee before exiting the building, but missed. In Sinclair Mini Mart, Simmons shot and wounded 2 more people. He then shot his former supervisor, 35-year-old Joyce Butts, twice, and wounded her in the office of Woodline Motor Freight. She survived and testified later that Simmons had yelled at her during a previous argument about wages. The entire rampage lasted 45 minutes. 2 people were killed and 4 wounded. Simmons' final act was as perplexing as it was chilly. He said to the secretary in Woodline Motor Freight, "I just wanted to kill Joyce. Just Joyce. I've gotten everybody who wanted to hurt me." Simmons surrendered to police without resistance, his spree of violence concluding as abruptly as it had begun. But the most heinous of his crimes were yet to be discovered. Simmons sat silently in his cell and stared at the wall. He refused to speak to investigators or even his attorneys. He didn't say a word during the interrogation. But when he was asked about his family, Simmons' eyes got red and started to well up. His lips started to quiver. The police got suspicious. They couldn't reach his family, so 2 officers drove to the isolated home. The investigation began on the chilling grounds of the Simmons family home. Here, detectives encountered a scene that defied belief. Family members' bodies laid out with a chilling meticulousness. It was a tableau that spoke volumes about the mindset of the killer. In the aftermath of this unprecedented massacre, questions swirled. What drove a father, a husband, a war veteran, to commit such unspeakable acts against his own family and community? And what can we learn from this tragedy to prevent such horrors in the future? In the wake of the horrific murders committed by Ronald Gene Simmons, law enforcement faced the daunting task of piecing together a puzzle that spanned both family tragedy and public rampage. As the probe widened to include Simmons' subsequent attacks in Russellville, the challenge for investigators was to understand the connection between the family murders and the seemingly random acts of violence that followed. The evidence gathered was overwhelming. Firearms, witness testimonies, and Simmons' own actions painted a picture of a man who, after committing an unspeakable act against his own family, sought to extend his vengeance to those he perceived had wronged him in the wider community. In a case that stunned even seasoned investigators, the question wasn't just who had committed these crimes, but why. What drives a man to annihilate his family and lash out at the world around him? The arrest of Ronald Gene Simmons brought an end to the immediate threat, but it was just the beginning of a quest for justice and understanding. The prosecution's task was to unravel the mind of Simmons, to present a narrative that could make sense of the senseless. As the investigation progressed, more disturbing details emerged. Allegations of abuse, control, and a life led under the tyranny of Simmons became the focus. Each piece of evidence added another layer to the dark portrait of a man who had lived a life of deception and brutality. In the courtroom, the full extent of his crimes would come to light, bringing some answers, but also leaving haunting questions about the nature of evil. What kind of man lurked behind the annihilation of his family and terrorizing a community? Simmons' life was marked by strict discipline and control, traits honed during his military career. But beneath the surface of this structured exterior lay a tumultuous inner world. Allegations of sexual assault within his family suggest deep-seated pathological behavior. Experts in criminal psychology often point to a history of abuse, either experienced or perpetrated, as a significant factor in the development of violent behavior. In Simmons' case, the blurring of boundaries within his own family, coupled with a need for dominance, may have contributed to his downward spiral. The isolation of the Simmons family at Mockingbird Hill paints a picture of a man intent on exerting absolute control. This isolation could have exacerbated existing mental health issues, creating a pressure cooker environment. What then triggered Simmons to turn to murder? The possibility of his wife seeking a divorce might have been the tipping point, challenging his authoritarian hold over his family. She had already tried to leave him on numerous occasions, but always returned. A family friend informed the police that Simmons' wife had been saving up money to divorce him when the murder happened. Simmons' wife had written to their son shortly before the killings. "I don't want to live the rest of my life with Dad. I am a prisoner here, and the kids too. Every time I think of freedom, I want out as soon as possible." Simmons' actions in Russellville suggest a broader rage directed not just at his family, but at anyone he perceived as a threat or who had rejected him. His targeting of individuals in the community indicates a blend of personal vendetta and displaced aggression. Yet the absence of any recorded mental illness diagnosis leaves us with more questions than answers. The depths of Simmons' mind remain, in many ways, a locked enigma. Could this tragedy have been averted? In exploring these questions, we confront the unsettling reality of how little we sometimes know about those closest to us. After the chilling massacre by Ronald Gene Simmons, the wheels of justice began to turn, bringing us to a courtroom where the grim details of his crimes would be laid bare. After a psychiatric evaluation, it was determined that he was sane and capable to stand trial. Simmons' trial was a focal point of national attention, a legal battle to seek justice for the unprecedented atrocity he had committed. The proceedings were swift, reflecting the urgency of a community seeking closure. In May 1988, Simmons stood trial for the murders outside his family, specifically the killings of Kathy Kendrick and Jim Chaffin. The evidence presented was overwhelming, leaving little doubt about Simmons' guilt. Simmons, who had acted with such brutality, now faced the consequences of his actions in a court of law. His demeanor in court was reported as defiant, a stark contrast to the calculated coldness of his crimes. On May 12, 1988, the verdict was delivered. Ronald Gene Simmons was found guilty and sentenced to death by lethal injection, plus 147 years. Remarkably, Simmons himself requested that no appeal be made on his behalf, saying, "To those who oppose the death penalty, in my particular case, anything short of death would be cruel and unusual punishment. Because of this, he had to be separated from other prisoners on death row. His life was in danger, as they believed Simmons' refusal to appeal his death sentence was jeopardizing their prospects of escaping their own executions." The second trial for the murders of his 14 family members began in February 1989. Here, the prosecution delved into the harrowing details of the family massacre, painting a picture of a man driven by control and rage. During the trial, a shocking moment unfolded. Simmons lashed out in court, punching the prosecutor and attempting to seize a deputy's gun, an act that only added to his infamy. This happened after Simmons' letter to his daughter Sheila was introduced, in which Simmons said, "You have destroyed me, and you have destroyed my trust in you. I will see you in hell." After she had disclosed that he was her child's father to the police. On February 10, 1989, Simmons was found guilty of 14 counts of capital murder. The judge, undeterred by Simmons' outburst, handed down another death sentence. This rapid succession from trial to sentence was unprecedented, reflecting the severity of the crimes. The execution warrant for Simmons was signed by Arkansas Governor and later President Bill Clinton on May 31, 1990. All visitors, including legal counsel and clergy, were refused by Simmons. On June 25th, he died via the fatal injection method he had chosen in the Cummins unit. This was the shortest period from sentence to execution to death in U.S. history since the death penalty was reinstated in 1976. His last words were, "Justice delayed finally be done is justifiable homicide." Nobody claimed his body, and he was buried in a common grave in Lincoln County, Arkansas. As we reflect on the legal proceedings against Ronald Gene Simmons, we are left to ponder the balance between justice and understanding. The case of Ronald Gene Simmons is a stark reminder of the potential for hidden dangers within our own homes, and it's crucial to recognize early warning signs. FBI profilers and psychologists suggest vigilance for certain behaviors, patterns of control, isolation, and abuse within a family. These can often be precursors to more violent actions. In cases like Simmons, where the perpetrator isolates the family, the intervention of external agencies becomes critical. Neighbors, friends, and relatives need to be attentive and proactive in reporting any suspicions. But perhaps the most profound lesson lies in understanding the human psyche. Simmons' case demonstrates the complex interplay of psychological factors that can lead to such extreme behavior. What led Ronald Gene Simmons to commit such heinous acts? The answer lies in a complex web of control, abuse, and psychological instability. His desire for dominance, coupled with deep-seated issues likely stemming from his abusive behavior within the family, set the stage for tragedy. Simmons' military discipline, juxtaposed with his chaotic personal life, created a volatile mix. The isolation and control he exerted over his family only fueled his capacity for violence. And when his authority was threatened, possibly by a looming divorce, it may have been the catalyst for the massacre. John Harris, one of Simmons' defense attorneys, said of his abused family, "I think he felt like they are going to take him out. He's going to take them out first." I think that was his mindset. Could anything have been done to prevent the carnage? In hindsight, the warning signs were there: isolation, abuse, and a man teetering on the edge. Timely intervention could perhaps have altered this tragic course. Simmons' story is a grim reminder that behind closed doors, within seemingly normal families, the seeds of tragedy can grow unnoticed. People feared him even back then in New Mexico. They said he was strange, unfriendly, antisocial. He didn't have much to say. A friend of his daughter's said, "He had a beer in his hand all the time. He had one little room he would stay in all the time. It was dark and seemed spooky, and it stunk." Attorney John Harris also said that there was more than one person to blame. If authorities had successfully arrested him back in 1981 on the basis of his daughter's sexual assault, the murders likely wouldn't have happened. However, prosecutors at the time said they had dropped the charges at the family's request. Ronald Gene Simmons' Christmas week killing spree is the worst mass murder committed by a single person in Arkansas history. What were the underlying reasons that made Simmons annihilate his whole family that once formed the core of his identity? For the Halbach family, a reminder that nightmares can filter into reality. For Teresa Halbach, October 31st, 2005 was another day at the office. As a freelance photographer working for Auto Trader magazine at the time, she received a call to shoot a few photos at the Avery's Auto Salvage. She was never seen again. First reported as a missing person on November 3rd, 2005, a large-scale search began for Teresa. On the afternoon of November 5th, 2005, her Toyota RAV4 SUV was found partially concealed in Avery's salvage yard. Investigators later discovered blood in the vehicle. Charred bone fragments and teeth were also found in a burn pit on the same property. Her car keys were in the room of the property owner, Stephen Avery. Born on March 22, 1980, Teresa was one of 5 siblings. Her parents, Richard and Karen, raised her on the family dairy farm. When she was 8 years old, her father sadly passed away. Karen eventually remarried Richard's brother, Thomas, and together they raised their blended family. Teresa was an outdoorsy girl who aspired to work for National Geographic as a photojournalist. Friends described her as having an uncanny ability to make everyone feel welcomed. She was dedicated to her studies, making summa cum laude with a degree in photography. After graduating from the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay, Teresa continued to work with Pierce Photography, whom she interned with during her college days. She started her own business, Photography by Teresa, and operated out of the Pierce studio. She traveled extensively, and to supplement her income, she took on freelance jobs for Auto Trader magazine, taking pictures of vehicles that were put up for sale. It was this job that led to her untimely death. All the evidence found pointed to one person, Stephen Avery. Avery had contacted Teresa to set up an appointment to take pictures of his sister's minivan. According to records, she was last seen at 2:30 p.m. that afternoon. This was later confirmed by Stephen's nephew, Bobby, who told police he saw the car enter the salvage yard. Avery was initially charged with a weapons violation as a convicted felon. On November 11, 2005, he was formally charged with the murder of Teresa, kidnapping, sexual assault, and mutilation of a corpse. The blood found in the SUV proved a positive match for Avery's. A set of car keys belonging to Teresa found in Avery's room. All the while, Avery maintained his innocence, alleging the police were trying to frame him. He was in the middle of a civil lawsuit with Manitowoc County for $36 million. Stephen Avery, born July 9, 1962, is a Manitowoc County native, raised in Wisconsin alongside his 2 brothers, Charles and Earl, and sister Barbara by parents Dolores and Alan. He dropped out of high school with reports suggesting he had an IQ of 70. Stephen was no stranger to the law. In 1981, he served 10 months in jail following the burglary of a bar. A year later, he pleaded guilty to animal cruelty after pouring gasoline on his pet cat and tossing it into a bonfire. For this, he served another 9 months. In 1985, he threatened his cousin Sharon Morse by forcing her off the road and thereafter pointing a gun at her. He later alleged that he wanted her to stop spreading rumors. She'd filed a report alleging that he exposed himself on several occasions and was masturbating in the front yard. Although he received a 6-year sentence for his crime, he was granted bail and released. However, it was a case of mistaken identity that had him locked away for nearly 2 decades. Penny Bjornston reported that she'd been walking along a beach near 2 rivers when she was attacked and assaulted on July 29, 1985. Police believe the description she gave had a striking resemblance to Avery. She went on to choose his photo during an interview with police and later picked him out during a suspect lineup. He was arrested and charged with the attack on Bjornston. A state-appointed forensic official claimed that a hair found on Avery's shirt was consistent with the victim's. This evidence led to his conviction in December 1985. All this despite a staggering 16 witness testimonies and a time-stamped receipt to prove his whereabouts at the time of the assault. Stephen was convicted of rape and attempted murder and sentenced to 32 years in prison. Avery maintained his innocence and appealed in both 1987 and 1996. Both appeals were denied by the higher court. In 2001, though, Stephen made contact with the Wisconsin Innocence Project. The organization took on the case, and in 2002, Stephen was exonerated after DNA evidence proved he was innocent. It was later learned that another man, Gregory Allen, committed the crime and did, in fact, confess to it in 1995. Deputies alleged that Sheriff Deputy Thomas Kokorek received a call and said, "We already have the right guy, don't concern yourself with it." Allen and Steve bore a striking resemblance. Allen also committed a similar crime in the same area that Bjornston was attacked and was under police surveillance, but he was not considered a suspect. Allen was not even called up as a suspect in the lineup. After 18 years, Stephen walked out a free man on September 11, 2003. He then went to file a civil lawsuit against former Sheriff Thomas Korkorek and former District Attorney Dennis Vogel to the tune of $36 million. His freedom, however, wouldn't last long. When Teresa was reported missing, searches were conducted in the salvage yard. This was the place she had last been seen, as confirmed by Stephen's nephew, Bobby Gassi. Stephen claimed that he'd spoken to Teresa when she came by to take the photos, and then she left. Apart from the bone fragments, SUV, car keys, and blood found in the car, a bullet with Teresa's DNA was discovered in the garage. While incarcerated for Teresa's murder, Stephen's lawsuit was settled in February 2006, and he was paid a mere $400,000. While in jail, Stephen's younger nephew, Brendan Dassey, was also questioned in relation to the murder. Brendan, who was 16 years old at the time of the murder, was interrogated by police without parental supervision or a lawyer being present. Brendan confessed to investigators that he and Stephen first assaulted Teresa before murdering her. They then burned her body to destroy evidence.
I go down to put apple say, Tadeo, Polly, where? Alith, so.
He was charged in March 2006 as an accessory to the murder. He later recanted his statement, claiming that he'd been coerced by detectives. Brendan was charged with the same crimes as Stephen, although there was no physical evidence linking him to the crime scene. Stephen was convicted in March 2007 and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Later that same year, Brendan too was found guilty and given a life sentence with the possibility of parole in 2048. But there was not to be a cut-and-dry solution to the murder. The conviction sparked controversy. It was a sensational case. Stephen was the first of the Innocent Project's 174 exonerated convicts to be charged with a violent crime after being released. This caught the interest of aspiring filmmakers Laura Ricciardi and Moira Demos. Making a Murderer premiered on Netflix in 2015 and created a media maelstrom. The documentary, which took 10 years to research and produce, profiled the case of Steven Avery. The series chronicles the case timeline, beginning with Stephen's wrongful conviction in 1985 and subsequent exoneration, civil lawsuit against the Manitowoc County, and the arrest of Stephen and Brendan in regard to the murder of Teresa Halbach. It received both praise and criticism from critics and those directly involved with Teresa's case. The story caused on an international level has driven to division in public opinion. A petition to have Stephen and Brendan pardoned was drawn up and sent to the White House. It garnered over 128,000 signatures, but still failed to make any impact. The White House stated, as the convictions were made in a state court, the president had no authority to pardon either defendant. There are those who firmly support the innocence of Stephen and Brendan. These include his immediate family, who have supported him and also pray for the real killer of Teresa to be found. Sandy Greenman, Stephen's ex-fiancée, is one such person. Greenman has been his avid supporter, going as far as to start a Facebook page to garner support and give exposure to the case. She described him as a model inmate. Greenman stated that people take a perverse pleasure in tainting Stephen's name. People like to say Steven Avery has been violent all his life, which is not true, she said. Most notably, though, was the support offered by Kim Kardashian. The socialite has been using her influence to advocate for a fair justice system. Having come across the case on a social media site, her interest was piqued. Although she has made appeals to the governor, even her level of influence has no sway. However, she hasn't given up and hopes to seek justice for both Stephen and Brendan. The other half feels Stephen is where he belongs. On that side of the coin is Jody Stokowski, another ex-fiancée. Jody initially pledged her support in Stephen's innocence during the documentary. Afterwards, she alleged that she had lied and it was all an act. Jody went on to explain to Nancy Grace in an interview that he threatened to kill her and her family.
The first thing I want to ask you is, do you believe Steven Avery killed Teresa Halbach? Yes, I do. Why? Because he threatened to kill me and my family and a friend of mine.
He alleged that he wanted revenge on all women after his life was wrongfully stolen from him. Stephen is the one person I can't trust. He's a monster, she said. The show also ignited a debate regarding the perspective covered by the documentary. For the supporters of Stephen and Brandon, they feel the points most significant to the trial were highlighted. Dean Strang, one of Stephen's attorneys, agreed that the documentary covered enough to give the public a chance to judge for themselves. He disagreed that the series was subjective. As for the relatives of Teresa, they say the show saddened them. The Hallbacks stated the show sought to entertain and seek profit from their loss. Teresa's aunt, Kay Giordana, and cousin-in-law, Jeremy Fournier, both stated that the show was one-sided. Former Calumet County District Attorney Ken Krantz alleges he was not given a chance to tell his side of the story. The filmmakers denied this and claimed that he refused to give an interview. In an interview with People magazine, Krantz alleges the documentary has left out key pieces of evidence. These include Stephen using a fake name when calling Teresa, DNA belonging to Stephen was found on the SUV's hood latch, and a ballistics report showed that the bullet found in the garage was fired from a rifle owned by Stephen. Krantz further alleges that prior to her murder, Teresa had once before made a trip to the Avery residence. When Stephen answered the door with only a towel on, she said she wouldn't go back because she was scared of him. In response to criticism from Krantz and other officials, the filmmakers said they'd given prosecutors the opportunity to answer questions. They believed that the documentary was a fair representation of the case and covered the most consequential evidence given during the trial. The documentary had its desired effect. It poked holes into the narrative of Stephen and Brendan's case by exposing allegations of police and prosecutorial misconduct, evidence tampering, and witness coercion. At the outset, Stephen called out the police for trying to frame him. This to avoid the county paying out the $36 million lawsuit he filed. Stephen believed his lawsuit would be undermined if he was convicted of another violent crime. To avoid a conflict of interest, Manitowoc County gave neighboring Calumet County authority over the handling of the case. Part of the deal, however, was that Calumet could use resources which included personnel from Manitowoc. The key in Stephen's room was found by a Manitowoc sheriff's deputy after several searches of the property. Another allegation made was regarding the blood evidence found in the car. Stephen and his defense team believe it was blood used from his prior conviction. Given credence to this scenario were the claims made by the defense. According to the Avery defense team, the vial containing Stephen's blood had been tampered with and a puncture hole was visible on the stopper. The prosecution, however, combated this claim by testing the blood for a preservative not found in fresh human blood and found none. Avery's defense team brought in an expert witness who stated it was not possible to tell if the negative result meant there was none of the preservative present or the technology to test itself was inconclusive. The documentary shone a spotlight on the manhood of interrogation with regard to Brendan Dassey. Dassey was just 16 years old during the interrogation. Firstly, he was interviewed without the supervision of a lawyer or parent. It's understood that both he and his mother consented to the interrogation. But what piqued the interest of many was that Brendan had an IQ of 73, classifying him as intellectually challenged. Many have argued that his intellectual disability left him open to suggestion, particularly when it was shown that the Reed technique of interrogation was used. The Reed technique has been criticized for producing high rates of false confessions, especially from juveniles and the mentally impaired. The technique is used to make the suspect comfortable and eventually confess to crimes through familiarity with the interrogators. The interrogator then proceeds to tell the suspect that the evidence shows that the suspect did commit the crime. Dassey allegedly agrees with the interrogators during the interviews, but later recanted his confession. He accused his first defense team of collaborating with the prosecution to get him to confess.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, it's your role. Yeah.
He's also claimed that coercion was used to elicit a confession from them. Both Stephen and Brendan have appealed their convictions, but have been denied innumerable times and remain in prison. The defense teams of both men have exhausted their efforts in trying to get retrials on both men's charges. Following the Making a Murderer documentary and the public outcry regarding Stephen and Brendan's innocence, significant new developments have occurred in both their legal teams. Professors Loring Nyrider and Stephen Dreisen of the Northwestern University Center on Wrongful Convictions of Youth are representing Brendan. They too began with numerous appeals and have come up against many hurdles, but have refused to give up just yet. Meanwhile, Stephen's appointment of Kathleen Zellner has shaken up the case and given further hits to the prosecution's claims. His previous lawyers, Dean Strang and Jerry Buting, have taken their newfound fame and gone on tour to promote and bring attention to the case of Stephen Avery. Zellner, considered a trailblazing trial lawyer, has been responsible for overturning 19 wrongful convictions. Her dogged determination and careful analysis of cases has seen her uncover missing evidence that helped exonerate her clients. Most recently notable, she was a consultant for Johnny Depp and his defense team during his trial. Zellner hit the ground running once she was appointed to Stephen's defense team and firmly believes her client is innocent. One of the first things she put to rest was the alleged confession of Joseph Evans Jr. Evans alleged he was responsible for killing Teresa and trying to frame Stephen. Zellner stated that it was a not-so-subtle attempt at publicity. Previously, Evans played snitch and allegedly wrote a 9-page letter to media outlets claiming he heard Stephen confess to the murder. This time, though, it seems he wanted in on a portion of reward money to make his life in prison more comfortable. However, his claim is not gaining the traction he expected. In August 2016, Zellner filed a motion demanding new scientific testing be done. Willing to pay for the extensive testing, Zellner intended to use this evidence to prove that Stephen had been framed. The theory was that 3 different burn pits showed evidence of human remains being burned. A particularly significant find was that of a human pelvic bone fragment, a bone that was given to the Hallbachs as part of Teresa's remains. This action, claims Zellner, was proof that Teresa's remains were planted in Stephen's burn pit. The defense, however, didn't get the opportunity to test these bones as they were not disclosed to them. This was a Brady violation according to Zellner, meaning that evidence which could have helped exonerate Stephen was not disclosed in the proper manner with regards to the criminal case. Crucial evidence was just out of their reach. Zellner remained relentless in her pursuit for justice. She approached the case with a new angle, one that could potentially point to a new suspect in the case. Being unable to test the bone fragments, Zellner opted for forensic testing of the Dassey family computer. What she found on it was damning. Pornographic images of women in various stages of torture, violent images and videos depicting women as victims. All these images were allegedly accessed at times when Bobby Dassey was at home. Furthermore, Zellner pointed out that Barbara, Bobby, and Brendan's mother, along with Stephen's sister and her husband Stott Tadich, were trying to get rid of evidence that could implicate Bobby. The forensic team were able to download 2,449 pages of data from the computer to a CD-ROM to present as part of the motion for a retrial. On it were all the searches, videos, and photos accessed by Bobby. Bobby is the older brother of Brendan and the nephew of Stephen. He was also the key eyewitness for the prosecution at Stephen's trial. He alleged that he last saw Teresa going to his uncle's house, and when he returned from hunting that afternoon, did not see her or the car again. Added to these claims are the allegations of his half-brother, Brad Dassey. Brad is alleged to have said he believes his uncle is innocent. He also made claims that his stepmother, Barb, and Stephen's brother-in-law, Scott, wiped the computer, deleting all pornographic material. Allegedly, Barb has filed a harassment suit against Brad following a conversation they had about tracing deleted files from a computer, which some believe is, in part, to ensure Brad remains silent about his knowledge. For Bobby, though, the final nail in this coffin could be the evidence that exonerates Stephen, and, in turn, Brendan. An eyewitness has come forward claiming to have seen Bobby being assisted by a much older man pushing Teresa's SUV back into the salvage yard. Thomas Sawinski stated in a sworn affidavit that he drove by Bobby and the other man while en route to deliver newspapers. When he passed the duo a second time, Bobby allegedly stepped out in front of his car to stop him. Thomas swerved to avoid him and continued on his morning route. He said that Bobby's eyes showed he was not pleased to see him there. Following the discovery of the SUV, Thomas realized the significance of the find and contacted police. He told them everything he'd seen that morning, and their response was, "We already know who did it." He provided his details, but he never heard back from them. For Zellner, this provides a contradiction to the prosecution's key witness. If proven true, which she's confident about, Bobby's testimony would be false. Zellner believes the rejection of all the crucial evidence in favor of Stephen denied him a fair chance to prove his innocence years ago. The newly filed motion is still with the appeals court and is awaiting an opinion or decision to be read over in November 2022. Stephen Avery continues to maintain his innocence. Kathleen Zellner, in her own words, says she represents the wrongfully convicted and added, "If you lie to her, she will find you out." Could Stephen be the scapegoat to a bigger conspiracy? Is this all a conspiracy to discredit Stephen's claim of improper police procedure? Or was there a monster truly hiding within Stephen all these years? Please let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. On July 31st, 1999, 17-year-old high school seniors and best friends J.B. Beasley and Tracy Hollett began their journey from their hometown of Dothan, Alabama. They were headed towards a birthday party for J.B. in Headland, Alabama, but the girls ended up getting lost along the way. In a phone call to her mother from Ozark around 11:30 p.m., Tracy informed her mom that they were heading back home. However, neither girl would ever make it home. Their lifeless bodies would be found the next day in the trunk of their car, raising the long-debated question of what might have happened to them. Did it have something to do with the party? Or did the girls run into trouble on the road heading back from Ozark? Located in southeast Alabama, near the Florida border, Ozark is known as the home of Fort Worker. Situated in the heart of Dale County, it's a typical charming southern town. Home to nearly 15,000 people, it's a nice place for both raising a family and spending retirement years. However, the town was not the sort of place to hit the headlines until the gruesome double homicide of two high school seniors in 1999, which baffled the community for years to come. J.B. Hilton Green Beasley was born on July 31st, 1981, to parents Cheryl and Hilton Lanier Beasley in Troy, Alabama. After her parents separated, she moved to Dothan with her mother in 1984. She was adored by her mother as well as her stepfather, Joey Bagoon, whom her mother married after a few years. She grew up in a nice home in Dothan along with her four sisters. J.B. grew up to be a very outgoing girl who was involved in various activities, including cheerleading, dance, piano, and swimming. She even modeled for several agencies along with her sisters. Besides all of her hobbies, she loved hanging out with her friends and family. It was high school where J.B. met her fellow cheerleader Tracy Hollett, and the two did not take long to become best friends. Tracy Jean Hollett was born on March 3, 1982, to parents Carol and Robert Hollett. Unfortunately, her father, who worked in the Dothan Police Department, died when Tracy was only 5 years old. Her mother later remarried a man named Mike Roberts, who helped raise Tracy along with her mother. Unlike J.B., Tracy was a bit shy, but never hesitated to put people before herself. She was also very protective over her two brothers, who were much younger than her. Even at a young age, she was a responsible older sister. Tracy also attended Northview High School and regularly received good grades and was a cheerleader alongside J.B. As both girls were blossoming into their adulthood, J.B. and Tracy were oblivious to their dreadful fate, which would strip them of all their future hopes and dreams. On July 31st, 1999, at around 10:05 p.m., J.B. and Tracy left Dothan in J.B.'s black 1993 Mazda 929 to attend a birthday party organized in J.B.'s honor in Headland, just a few miles north. However, the young girls, being unfamiliar with the roads leading to their destination, soon found themselves in trouble. Within a few minutes of starting their journey from their hometown, they got lost. Around 10:30 p.m., J.B. and Tracy stopped at a BP gas station near the intersection of Routes 173 and 431 in Headland in search of directions. Using a payphone at that gas station, they called their friends to get better directions to the party. After the call, the girls kept driving to reach their destination, but instead ended up in Ozark, Alabama, about 24 miles northwest of Headland. Realizing they still did not understand the directions to the party, at 11:30 p.m., the girls stopped at the Big Little store. Although the store was already closed by then, Tracy called her mother from the store's payphone. She informed her of how they got lost and ended up in Ozark, and that they were now planning to come back home. At the same time, a woman named Marilyn Merritt and her daughter stopped at the gas station to buy a soda. The girls then asked her for directions back to Dothan. Marilyn tried to explain the way as well as she could, and the young girls seemed to understand. Marilyn would later say that she noticed that the girls looked nice and polite, with a clean and tidy car. Marilyn remembered seeing the girls pulling out of the parking lot and turning right, just as Marilyn had directed. Although nothing seemed amiss at the time, J.B. Beasley and Tracy Hollett never made it home. The following morning, August 1st, 1999, at around 8 a.m., Tracy's mother called the police to report her daughter missing. It did not take police long to find their first clue regarding the girls' whereabouts. Later that day, after Tracy was reported missing, cops successfully located JB's car, which had been parked on Herring Avenue in Ozark. The most bizarre thing was, despite having filled the gas tank the day before, the tank was almost empty. The car was muddy, the driver's side window was partially down, yet the doors were locked. However, police could not find any signs of a forced entry into the vehicle. Inside the car, JB's driver's license was lying on the dash. The purses of both girls were still inside the car, along with their cash. The only known missing item was JB's car keys. However, there was no sign of either of the girls. A palm print was recovered from the trunk lid of the locked trunk, which gave the police a foreboding feeling that something was horribly wrong. Assessing the scene, cops theorized that the locked trunk could provide them with significant clues, but without the keys, they could not open the trunk. It took them 6 long hours to discover that they could open the trunk of the car with the help of an interior latch without needing a trunk key or a locksmith. Upon opening the trunk, police made a grisly discovery. The lifeless bodies of the 2 girls were stuffed inside. Both girls were fully clothed, but their pants were soiled from the waist down. Both girls had been shot once in the head, Tracy in the temple, and JB in the right cheek. Tracy had a 9mm shell casing on her leg, scratches on her arm, and her jeans had thorn briars on them. JB's clothes, on the other hand, were muddy and dirty, especially her newly purchased shoes. Although authorities concluded that the teenagers were killed execution style, they had most likely been killed inside of the trunk. As the families were informed about the heart-wrenching discovery, authorities formally started their homicide investigation. Although investigators were considering robbery as a possible motive during the initial phase of the investigation, it was quickly ruled out after confirming that not only the girls' purses, but also their jewelry, money, and credit cards remained inside the car. Autopsies later confirmed that there were no traces of alcohol or drugs in their system. The report also suggested that neither girl had been sexually assaulted prior to their demise. This basically ruled out the possibility of the crime being sexually motivated. However, more than 2 months later, the state crime lab issued a report indicating that there were traces of unknown semen on JB's bra, panties, and skin. The palm print recovered from the lid of the trunk also remained unidentified. With no matches in the system and no one to compare their evidence against, authorities were left without much to go on. As word of a double murder of 2 teen girls spread like wildfire, authorities were no close to zeroing in on a suspect. A reward was also put out in an attempt to gather information regarding the murder, but it did not uncover any new leads. However, authorities, it seemed, soon got an unexpected breakthrough. On September 1st, exactly 1 month after the bodies of JB and Tracy were found, a longtime Ozark resident, 28-year-old Johnny William Barrington, walked into the Ozark Police Department to tell a bizarre story. He claimed that he had been a witness to the high-profile double homicide of the Dothan teenagers. Barrington told police that on the night of the murders, around the same time Tracy Hollett called her mother from the payphone at the Big Little store, he went out to buy milk for his 2-year-old son. He claimed that while he was out, he had witnessed the horrendous act. He returned home at 1 a.m., visibly upset, and told his wife that he'd been hit by a black truck near Herring Road. In the days following JB and Tracy's murder, when he shared the information with some of his friends, they convinced him that he should go to the police with this information, as it could be linked to the murders of Tracy and JB, which would not only help police crack the case, but could also get him the reward as well. Disturbingly, in the 4 hours of interview with Ozark police, Barrington changed his story 6 times. According to then Ozark Police Chief Tony R. Spivey, Barentine initially said that on the night of the killings, he had seen a black truck speeding away from the area where the girls were found. But as the interview continued, his story kept evolving and changing. Finally, he claimed that he picked up a tattooed man he didn't know, and the two drove by the Big Little store. He further claimed that the man to whom he'd given a ride got into a car with two girls, whom Barentine identified as the deceased Dothan teenagers. He said they ended up on Herring Avenue, where the man forced the girls out of the car. A struggle occurred between the men and the girls as they were trying to get away. After placing them in the trunk, Barentine said, he saw something in that man's hand moments before hearing two gunshots, and when the man returned, Barentine again gave him a ride from the scene and then went home. In another version, Barentine confessed to investigators that he knew the man he'd picked up and given a ride to, and identified him to be his neighbor. Alarmingly, Barentine himself lived less than a mile from where police discovered the bodies. Police did not buy his story, naming him the prime suspect in the murder of J.B. Beasley and Trissy Hollett. Ozark police arrested Johnny Barentine on the spot, charging him with 2 counts of capital murder. But there were several problems with his accounts. Barentine never mentioned sexual activity that would account for the semen found on JB's clothing and body. Besides, the neighbor he implicated had an alibi for the evening. Several people noted that he looked startled and like he had just awoken from a deep sleep in his mugshot. Just after arrest, Barentine immediately admitted that he had fabricated the whole story in order to collect the reward money. However, police at the time believed they arrested the right person. In the preliminary hearing on September 21st, Alavera Bureau of Investigation agent Charles Hardims testified that Barentine was able to describe the girl's clothing and other items consistent with the crime, suggesting he was there at the scene. From the time of his arrest, Barentine was held without bond in the Dale County Jail in Ozark. In an October 18th bond hearing, Barentine denied he was involved in the killings, confessing to the judge that he never picked up a tattooed man and didn't see anything the night of the murders. He said that he simply went to the BP at about 11 p.m. to get milk for his little boy, and later fabricated the whole story to claim the reward money. However, he was denied the bond and sent back to jail. Even during this turbulent time, Barentine's family members never stopped supporting him. They even gave interviews to the media professing his innocence, saying he was incapable of hurting anyone. Barentine's lawyer, Bill Kimmons, also maintained that his client was not responsible for the double murders in any way, shape, or form. He further stated that the 4 hours of continued interrogation took a toll on Barentine, who had wrapped himself in this mess of a lie. During police questioning, he was never told that he could go to the bathroom or was free to leave whenever he wanted. Barentine's defense also pointed out the fact that Barentine only finished the 7th grade and a portion of the 8th grade. He said his client was in special education classes, indicating his inability to plan this heinous crime. Barentine was finally released from jail on December 17, 1999, after it was revealed that Barentine's DNA did not match that from the semen found on JB's body and clothing. In January 2000, a Dale County grand jury declined to indict Barentine and cleared him as a suspect in this double murder. After Johnny Barentine was cleared of suspicion, the investigation endured a setback. The methods employed by investigators were also criticized. There began to be mutterings that the Ozark police were incapable of handling the case. However, police still had some potential suspects on their radar. One of the most viable suspects was a man from Michigan who was at a party the night of the murders near where JB's car was later found. Investigators discovered that the man, who was not publicly named, left town within days of the murders. Investigators have even traveled to Michigan 3 times to interview him. He could not account for 3 or 4 hours of his time on the night of the murders, and later made some suspicious statements to people. However, the police declined to elaborate on these alleged statements. As it turned out, he was also later ruled out by DNA. One other significant lead police were chasing during the initial phase of the investigation was the driver of a small white pickup truck. A video surveillance camera inside the Big Little store caught a grainy, poor-quality image of what appeared to be a small white pickup truck at the gas pumps at the same time JB and Tracy were at the payphone calling Tracy's mother. No digital trail could be traced, though, as there was no record of a gas purchase at the pump at that time. The video neither showed anyone getting out of the truck, nor did it show the driver clearly. After releasing a photo of the truck to the media a month into the investigation, police urged the public to come forward with information. Unfortunately, both the driver and the truck vanished into thin air as the lead faded away. The last lead for the investigators was a man from Mississippi. Police said the man, who was extradited from Jones County, had been arrested there on an outstanding warrant for possession of drug paraphernalia issued in Ozark. The man had been staying with relatives in Ozark, but left 2 days after the murders. According to Spivey, investigators wanted to question him in connection with the case. However, no significant information came out in light of this lead. Without any evidence, investigators were forced to let him go. In March of 2000, a woman called police and said she heard screams and 2 gunshots near Highway 123 South, just inside the city limits, on the night of July 31st, 1999. When asked why she did not come forward earlier, she claimed she was scared to get involved. Based on her description, police thoroughly searched the area and discovered a 9mm bullet, the same type used to kill the girls. But the brand name of the bullet did not match the brand of bullet shell casing found on Tracy's body. Furthermore, the unspent bullet had no markings that would help with forensic comparison to other evidence in the case. Again, another dead end for investigators. Although several leads over the years proved to lead nowhere, investigators never lost hope in the search for a DNA match. As the heartbroken families of JB and Tracy tried to get on with their lives, the case turned cold. Then years later, another twist in a case added another layer to the thrilling mystery. After remaining cold for years, 2015 would mark a bombshell allegation in the murder case of J.B. Beasley and Tracy Hollett. Rena Crum, a sworn Ozark Auxiliary police officer, came forward and openly accused an Ozark police officer of murdering J.B. Beasley and Tracy Hollett and others of covering it up. Rena alleged that on the night of July 31st, 1999, a police officer for Ozark Police pulled over J.B. Beasley, demanding to know the whereabouts of some cassette tapes that contained recorded conversations. According to Rena, these tapes could have incriminated Ozark police officers regarding the illegal business of cocaine distribution and profits. The incident escalated into the murders of 2 innocent teens, she further alleged. Rena claimed that she'd been threatened by multiple law enforcement officials who had knowledge of the murderer's identity and covered it up by getting rid of evidence. Rena named 3 cops, Gary Butch Whittington, Rex Tipton, and Eddie Henderson, accusing them of harassing and threatening her. She went as far as to say that then Police Chief Tony Spivey, who headed the original investigation, had also helped cover it up. However, she shied away from revealing the name of the police officer, who, she claimed, had actually committed the murders. Renowned American journalist and newspaper editor John B. Carroll wrote an article saying that he believed the officer in question presumed the 2 girls intended to use these tapes in a court case that was scheduled for August 2, 1999, less than 48 hours after they were murdered. The tapes were to be entered as evidence into that case. In this article, Carroll also stated that Rena was severely beaten with a baseball bat after coming forward, which stopped her from naming the actual killer. The law enforcement officials Rena accused had all denied having any involvement in the murders of J.B. Beasley and Tracy Hollett. Without any physical evidence, none of them were ever formally named as a suspect in the case. Regardless of that, the allegations blew up on numerous true crime websites and social media, leading to a defamation lawsuit. On January 29, 2016, Keith Coffin, Rex Tipson, Tony Spivey, Eddie Henderson, and Gary Butch Whittington, all Ozark, Alabama police officials, filed a lawsuit against Rena Crum, John B. Carroll, and D. Matthews for libel, slander, and defamation of character. That case was dismissed in 2018. In May 2016, Rena Crum received a suspended sentence and a $250 fine after being convicted for harassing J.B. Beasley's sister. Over the years, authorities investigated many theories. They interviewed hundreds of people and took DNA samples from several suspects, but to no avail. It would take 20 years and the innovation of new DNA technologies before police could apprehend a suspect. In March 2019, investigators sent the DNA found on JB's body and clothes to the Virginia-based Parabon Nanolab, which specializes in DNA phenotyping and genetics using public genealogy databases. After analyzing the DNA, the lab finally made a connection to a suspect, Coley McCraney. 45-year-old Coley Lewis McCraney was never on the radar of investigators in the brutal 1999 murders of J.B. Beasley and Tracy Hollett until DNA implicated them in the crime. McCraney, who's an Alabama native, graduated from Carroll High School in Ozark in 1992, where he was an athlete as well as the president of the Library Club. After that, he joined the U.S. Air Force and served there from 1993 to 1997. He was married in 1992, but separated from his first wife in 1994 and later divorced. According to the reports of Dothan Eagle at the time, McCraney's ex-wife filed a complaint with the Air Force in 1994, stating that McCraney had assaulted her. McCraney remarried in 2001 and had children with his second wife. Other than failing to pay child support in 1998, McCraney had no criminal record in the past 20 years or so. He'd been working as a trucker all of his life and had worked for several trucking companies in Alabama over the years. In recent years, he co-founded a church and worked as a bishop there. At the time of the killings, he was around 26 and living on Lisenby Drive in Ozark, about 1 mile away from where the bodies of J.B. Beasley and Tracy Hollett were found in 1999. 2 decades after the Splain High School seniors J.B. Beasley and Tracy Hollett were found, Coley McCraney was arrested after a traffic stop in Daleville, Alabama on March 19, 2019. In the interview with police, after he was taken into custody, McCraney said he did not know the girls. Investigators did not clarify any motive for the murder. The news of his arrest was a great shock to the Ozark community and the Ozark police chief, Marlins Walker, who went to school with McCraney. As it seemed that the many twisted strands in this baffling case were finally all being tied together, there was to be one more revelation. The now 53-year-old Rena Crum, who previously accused the Ozark Police Department of covering up the murder, recanted her allegations as she testified during a hearing from McCraney in August 2022. McCraney, now 49, is facing 5 counts of capital murder charges for the shooting deaths of J.B. Beasley and Tracy Hollett. He now sits behind bars in Dale County Jail as of the time of his arrest. His bond has been denied, pending his trial on April 17, 2023. The news of finally apprehending the killer was a relief to the families of both girls. However, reliving all the haunting memories through the trial and hearings is another painful journey still to come. We can only hope that the families can heal through a sense of peace that their daughters are finally getting justice more than 2 decades later. Do you believe McCraney is responsible for the murders? If so, what was the motive? Do you find any validity in the police cover-up claims? Let us know what your thoughts are in the comment section below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more gripping stories like this.